Hi, and welcome back to our study of the history of philosophy without any gaps by Peter Adamson. And for this sub-series, also Jonardon Canary. I screwed that up.
Jonardon Canary.
Jonardon Canary. We're studying the history of Indian philosophy, episodes 13 to 15. And today we have a whole party. I'm Nerdalliun Plebz, and with us is Rogério Marques, Graham Pong, Zara Spake, and Wolfy. Welcome, guys.
Nice to
Hey,
be here.
good to be back.
Great to be here.
See ya.
Yeah, so we will be looking at possibly the greatest or largest piece of literature today. We hope we can finish this in due time, the Mahabharata. Also, a part of the Mahabharata that is the most famous one, called the Bhagavad Gita. And will also look at the doctrine of non-violence. So let's dive in. So here is a nice depiction of the chariot that we will see when we go into the Bhagavad Gita, situated in the middle of the Mahabharata, just before a huge war erupts, and the two characters are in this chariot, and we will see what goes down between them. But first, we will look at the Mahabharata more generally. And with an ethical point of view, which was the emphasis, to be sure, by Peter Adamson and Jonardon Canary. So what does Mahabharata mean, this strange word to us who we are not Indians? So Mahabharata, Maha means great, and it's also, this prefix is also used in other words like Mahayana, which means great vehicle, and here in this case, great, and Bharata is the name of the dynasty, which is the main focus family in the history, and Bharata was the name of that subcontinent before people started calling it from the Indus river name. So barring the Indus river's influence to be called India, otherwise it was called Bharat. And so it can also be interpreted as the great tale of the Bharata dynasty, or also means India being great. So maybe they should think about making India great again, since apparently India was great, judging by these kinds of stories. Also refers to itself as the fifth Veda. So quite this piece of literature has quite a self image, so it happens after the Ramayana. So it can be perceived as a kind of a sequel for what went down between Rama, his brother Lakshman, Sita, and Hanuman and friends, so by popular tradition, this Mahabharata thing, especially the war, happens more than 5,000 years ago. And this is by tradition. So we have no accurate way of knowing what happened historically. Yeah. And so this is what is the context of the Mahabharata. And also, I think it's interesting to show the myths in perspective with one another. So Ramayana and Mahabharata, two of the most oldest ones. The Epic of Gilgamesh should be in uppercase Gilgamesh. Sorry about that. And also the Iliad and Odyssey, the Shahnameh, which is much later, 10th century, and the Journey to the West. And so these are part of the heritage, the epic heritage of humanity. And I emphasize that we should look at these epics as much as we can and learn from them, because if they persisted in time, it is for good reasons. And probably one of those reasons is because although they might have ethically reprehensible or reproachable examples like we see in the Iliad and Odyssey, the ways in which the gods behave in ways that are not kind of proper for society, for human beings. But in contrast, in the Ramayana, we see the heroes acting in a very ethically proper way, especially when contrasting with the demons. And in the Mahabharata, when we look at the Pandavas, in general, they are acting in quite straightforward, upstanding ways compared to the nemesis of them, which are their cousins, the Kauravas. So yeah, I'll pause here and let you guys speak your mind before we go forward into other aspects of the Mahabharata.
I had a quick thought to interject right at the last thing that you said, if you don't mind, which is with our conception of Yahweh and God, gods are supposed to be perfect and they're never supposed to make any mistakes. And so it's weird for us to read stories about the gods acting in reprehensible ways. I've heard people talk about this a lot, especially when they look at like the Greek myths and, oh, Zeus is doing this and, oh, that's so terrible. Why would you admire a god like that? I have a different thought on that, which is if you believe that there's something not yet perfect about being, about the cosmos, and that it's evolving and changing or metamorphosing, right? The metamorphoses course that we're doing from Ovid. If you believe it's changing, the way you would depict that is that the god is learning a lesson. So for without telling the story or going off on a long tangent, there's stories where Zeus does things and has to repent at the end, right? It's not that the story is saying it's good because Zeus did it. Zeus and Io, oh, it's great. Zeus was interested and he went and did this thing. No, it caused a lot of trouble. And that's maybe a way of depicting that things aren't yet evolved to where they need to be. So I don't know. I would just put a caution on us judging the deities in these stories. If what we could do instead is say, oh, well, things are getting better. And the way to depict the cosmos is in the form of these deities. And so they're changing. Anyway, we don't have to talk more about that right now, but
I would like to add a quick counterpoint to that, though, and that's that, my reading of the Bible, there's more than enough stuff in the Bible that Yahweh did that I find abominable. I mean, you got slaughter of the firstborn, you got that great flood, you got all the ordering to slaughter people, To me, it's in a lot of ways, Yahweh's worse than what the Greek gods were doing.
Well,
I'm just going to tag out on that.
Well, I would agree that we also should be reading the Bible in the way that I just described, where we say, maybe we're wrong to think it's all perfect if it comes from the divine, but that's a much longer conversation and not what we're here to talk about. So we won't go down it, but yeah.
We will actually touch on this, the divine comment theory of ethics. So it will be quite present here. Go ahead, Nerdalliun.
Yeah, I was going to say we did touch on it when we talked about the Greeks. Some of the really early Greeks made that kind of argument that the stories about the gods paint them in ethical, reprehensible lights, and therefore the stories themselves are bad because it's sacrilegious to ascribe morally reprehensible behavior to the gods. I'm trying to remember which of the Greeks was the first to do that.
All the time.
Xenophanes did it, and probably he influenced Plato to do that as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Xenophanes, I think.
But contrast this,
ridiculous.
Going back to India, contrast this. The writers of the Ramayana and Mahabharata, it seemed to me, by my contact with these two epic myths, in contrast to the Iliad and Odyssey and also the Bible, they went to great pains to show that the characters portrayed as heroes, as noble individuals, they commit mistakes, to be sure, yes, but they are for the most part trying to align themselves with the good. While the characters that are depicted either as demons in the Ramayana or the nemesis guys in the Mahabharata, they really have deep character flaws, and they show an unwillingness to correct themselves in general. And they use these as a narrative device to see, okay, these guys, yeah, they are nice role models for you to learn. You can even learn in addition to their noble attributes, to learn from their mistakes as well, kind of like naivete or something like that. And look at the demons. If you go the path that they go of vicious violence and attach yourself too much to desires and whatnot, you will end up like them in general. So I think they did a really great job for people who think like children, for instance, to give them things already more or less structured so that they don't commit the mistake to choose wrong role models, which is, well, a point. Of course, if more mature people read Homer's Iliad and Odyssey with the perspective of, okay, I will look at all the characters and try to learn from these characters lessons of regarding human nature, how these kinds of characters with their considerably deep flaws, how will they influence things, and learn more about character flaws and whatnot from them, and not necessarily be looking for role models in, for instance, the gods or even Achilles and the other heroes. And so it depends on the maturity of the people approaching these texts. But I think the Ramayana and Mahabharata do a good job for people who are more ethically naive to pick up some nice role models.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that sort of teaching by way of giving role models is only one of the ways in which stories can be instructive, and I think that's more or less the point you were making, Rogério. But I think the people who wrote the stories weren't only concerned with presenting stories that'll be imitated, and if they are imitated, will lead to better outcomes. I do think they try to tell the stories in ways that are instructive, maybe in other ways, to also demonstrate an understanding of just how things work. And I think some of the depictions of gods really depict them as powers that be, and sort of in the kind of natural world, all kinds of things happen that are, if it was a intentional being making those things happen, it would be morally reprehensible. But those things happen, so like it's not a question of for people to sort of wave their fingers at God, like, how dare you flood the city and kill hundreds of people, or how dare you make a volcano erupt and kill lots of people. Like those things, if someone intended to do them, would be horrific, well, horrifically immoral. But I think in some ways these gods present powers that be in a way that's maybe not so much tied to character strengths and virtues, and that's mixed in with sort of tales of righteousness and morality and ethics. So I think they can combine a little bit, and I think some of that applies to human nature as well. So when they're presenting humans, I don't think they're specifically trying to only present humans as either a bad role model that should never be followed or a good role model that should always be followed, but trying to show people as they are, like morally complex beings that are in some ways imitable and admirable, in other ways flawed, and should not be imitated in those ways. So yeah, I think there's like a richness to these stories that go beyond just like, all right, who are the good guys? Yeah, we should totally be like them. And who are the bad guys? We should totally not be like them.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that. I think stories where there's like this very clear good guy, bad guy end up being much less interesting stories because of how far removed that is from most things that happen in the real world. They feel fake and superficial.
Contrived, perhaps.
Morality tales are written for infants, and even infants are bored by them. They'd rather watch a more complicated story than that. Absolutely, 100%. That's right.
I don't know. I rather enjoy the old Looney Tunes stuff, and they played that trope to the T, where
Those...
also the Tom and Jerry stuff, the Coyote and Roadrunner. I think there's value to mining all sorts of stories.
I agree. Those are good stories, though. Those aren't simplistic morality tales, right? You kind of feel for Tom that he can never get the mouse, right? It's complicated. It's not a morality tale.
Well, I was going to say, Oedipus is a morality tale, and that has value too. I'm not sure. I find value in almost everything, so I tend to speak up if something gets overly dismissed.
I think you and I agree. I think we agree. I think I'm using morality tale differently than you are, because I wouldn't call Oedipus a morality tale. So I'm just using the term differently, but I agree with you completely that complicated stories that have ethical quandaries for you to ponder over, those are the most valuable. I wouldn't call those morality tales. To me, a morality tale is something as simple as Johnny stole an apple and then something bad happened to him, something kind of overly simplistic. But in any case, we agree. You and I agree on Oedipus.
Yeah, getting back to the Mahabharata is one aspect that jumped out at me is a lot of the correspondence between the heroes / demigods in the Greeks and the Pandavas, and the way that they are overemphasized, almost superhero-ish. It's like Arjuna is almost like an Indian version of like Green Arrow and such. You can see the different aspects and the different sides. And I think that's also to help connect with the people as well, where you have each of them having such an oversized aspect of humanity that they can see the benefits and negatives that aspect can lead them in their own life. So they, as that way, that makes them both examples and, more than human, but also great examples at the same time. Going to tag on that.
Next, we will talk about the scale of this thing, unless you guys want to add something. Okay, we have a lot to cover. It's safe to say. So, the scale of the Mahabharata, weighed in scales against the 4 Vedas and found to be heavier, roughly 8 times longer than the Iliad plus Odyssey, or approximately 15 times longer than the Bible. And Bible starting with the Old Testament and New Testament. So here I tried my best to find physical copies of the books unabridged of all of them. So to the left, the Mahabharata. In the middle, above, of course, is the 4 Vedas and Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and the Bible to the right, from Genesis to Revelation. And I tried to scale the images to get the books more or less at the same size. So yeah, this is what humanity has been writing in terms of epic mythology during the past 3,000 years, maybe. Some of the greatest hits. And yeah, you guys are right. These works are not black and white things that are like ethical guidelines or ethical rules that people can just execute flawlessly in their daily lives and everything will go well. The world is very complicated, and probably that's why the authors of these books also try to increase the nuance and complexity of these books, to show that, for instance, characters that at first would seem completely reprehensible or somehow find some redeeming qualities in them in a character development arc, or vice versa. And so even with the character development, we can learn lessons of human nature, self-development, and some ethical pro tips to perhaps inspire people to implement in their daily lives according to the situations. So as regards to the Mahabharata, it basically boils down to 2 related sets of cousins struggle for control of the throne. The Pandavas on the left, who were 5, and the Kauravas to the right, who were 100. The Pandavas, who had a very auspicious and divine origin, they are all demigods. Their mother Kunti had relations with more than one god to birth each of them. And while the Kauravas had a kind of more seemingly uncanny or grotesque kind of birth, where they gestated for like 10 years in a woman. What came out of that gestation after she was starting to lose her patience and struck her belly was a mass of flesh. And then Vyasa, the sage, who is also the author, appears and tells the people they ate to separate the pieces of flesh into 100 jars filled with ghee, which is clarified cow's butter. And these guys developed there and then were birthed not from her but from jars. And so it's a kind of more scientific artificial womb kind of thing. So it makes a huge contrast between the origin stories of both sides. Yeah, and things started going south in the story when apparently they were going more or less along, barring some antics by the Kauravas, who were trying always to backstab the Pandavas, but were failing due to the divinity of the Pandavas and their resistance to poison and blunt attacks and sharp attacks and whatnot. And so they were deceived. The Pandavas were deceived by the Kauravas with a game of dice in which even the Pandavas' wife was on the line and the throne and everything, and the Kauravas managed to deceive the Pandavas, and so this originated the entire conflict succinctly. And so as this guy would say, this is not a love story. To summarize the characters, at least in a practical way, on the left side. So there's Yudhishthira, a reluctant leader, morally upright. Arjuna, greatest of archers, self-controlled. Bhima, strong, ferocious, vengeful. Nakula, accomplished master swordsman, versed in every question of morality and profit. Then there's Nakula's twin brother, Sahadeva, heroic, intelligent, wise, eloquent. And as a support, they have a really interesting friend called Krishna, which turns out is the avatar of Vishnu, the preserver. And then on the Kaurava side, they are led by Duryodhana, an anti-heroic leader, who, if he is portrayed by an actor, people that that cannot distinguish acting, fiction and real life, they will probably hate him like people hated Joffrey of Game of Thrones or something like that, the actor who portrayed Joffrey or whatnot. So he is really morally reprehensible in a way that's very accentuated. And of course, probably he has redeeming qualities, like he figures out how to gain advantage in many situations. He does things that are conducive to the accumulation of capital and whatnot. But in terms of fairness of distribution, justice and whatnot, he is a bit blindsided in that department. And then there's also Drona, who is a kind of like a sage martial artist kind of guy who trains all of them, including not just the Kauravas, but also the Pandavas, but then ends up siding in war with the Kauravas. And this is pretty much the characters. And well, feel free to comment on the characters before we go forward to the ethics kind of things.
Yeah, I don't have too much to say about the characters. Yeah, I think Peter Adamson and Ganeri just mostly focused on one of the specific themes of moral dilemmas or ethical dilemmas that are explored in the Mahabharata, and I think they do that partly because it's a history of philosophy and not a history of literature, so they don't go into a lot of detail into the storyline and the plot and all that. And I didn't look that up myself, so yeah, not too much to comment.
Okay, cool. Let's go forward. This season we will start with an engaging ethical dilemma. And so a group of strangers rushes up to you. They gasp, "You have to help us. We're being pursued by a group of murderous thieves who want to rob and kill us. Don't tell them which way we ran." Shortly after, a group of cruel-looking men arrive and ask, "Which way have the others gone?" So what do you guys do in such a situation like this?
So your options are to tell the truth, to stay silent, or to lie. Yeah.
I would add a fourth option, which is to go the Socrates way, which is to ask these guys why are they pursuing the other group to begin with.
What do you mean by others? What do you mean by which way? We could keep them here all day.
Yeah, exactly. Keep them entertained. And then tell them the truth when it's too late.
Wrestle you into submission.
Which others? I've seen lots of others. Some went this way, some went that way. Which group are you on?
How do you know you're not living in a cave and all of this is a shadow?
Yeah.
All right. Well, the first thing you should do is throw your copy of Kant away and just tell them, the wrong direction. Probably
start reading them Kant's Critique of Pure Reason.
Yeah.
Let me explain to you why I'm going to tell you the truth right now. We're going to start with a prolegomena, and we'll get there.
If you want to really delay, start with Mathematica Principia by Russell and Whitehead.
Yeah, and so when I was constructing this slide, I really imagined Kant popping out and saying lying is always morally wrong. And so, yeah. But what if consequentialism is clashing with with your duty?
You could do some sort of wise Diogenes kind of thing and say something like, the path that will get you to the place you want to be is that way, or something like that. Like, it's better that you not find the people, and I'm not going to spell that out, but go, something like that, and don't lie to them, but lie to them. I think So, does anybody here agree with Kant that it would be wrong to lie in this situation?
I don't specifically like when I talk about the ethics of lying. War is one of the examples I bring up, and it's the example that I think we'll make it to a little later as one of the cases in which it can be like deception can be a legitimate thing to do. Generally, in cases of war or when dealing with hostile enemies that are murderous thieves, for example, like the way to engage with hostile enemies is different in general from the way we engage with friends or families or non-hostile strangers. And I think taking context into account is very reasonable. So that counts for more than things than just lying. Many things more than just lying. Context, it matters a lot. Like usually, I'd say as a general rule of thumb, don't punch people in the face. But like I've punched people in the face in context where that was understood that that's among the things that can happen in like a martial arts dojo and everybody's friends and we're sparring. And yeah, you could get knocked in the face. And that's in that context, like punching someone in the face, not too bad. But there are other contexts where you really couldn't get away with punching someone in the face, even playfully, even like as a joke, it would be completely inappropriate. And so, yeah, I don't think a blanket statement, punching someone in the face, yes or nay, always. I think context matters enough that we can say something like, well, mostly no, but sometimes there are exceptions. And I think that's exactly how it goes for lying. Mostly deception is bad because it undermines trust and it undermines people's agency in a way that causes harm. But sometimes it's necessary, as in when dealing with murderous hostiles. I think some deception can be employed as a protective force, and I don't see any problem with that. And I think to some extent that can be universalized. I think you can take a meta step and say like, well, you have to sort like if you're going to specify universal rules, they have to include in them the context in which they apply and context in which they don't apply, and they could still be universal in some sense, like they apply to everyone. They're not partisan, so they're universal being impartial, but not so universal that you want it to happen in all contexts all the time. If you want to be too literal about that, you can say it's immoral to stand anywhere, because if you using the categorical imperative to say, well, you're only allowed to stand somewhere if you could simultaneously will everybody should stand exactly there at the same time always, and like that's not going to work. Like physically it won't happen, and if people tried, lots of people would die trying to occupy the same space. So like the categorical imperative doesn't make a lot of sense if you take it too literally and too literally and not understanding enough of the context. So yeah, that's what I have to say about.
So I mean, I think you're right that there's something wrong with the categorical imperative, but so to defend Kant a little bit, what he wants universalized is the motivation behind that's motivating your principle that you're using. So if you universalize that, you would say, well, it's okay to lie in this context. But if that was universalized, then they wouldn't believe you. They would know you were lying, right? And so you can't will it to be universalized because they would say, oh, in this situation, people lie. He said, go this way, I'll go the other way instead. So he's not saying everybody has to do the same thing all the time or, without context. He's saying in this context, could you will that everybody understood what was motivating your lie, in which point you couldn't, because then you wouldn't get away with the lie anymore. And he thinks that that's irrational and self-contradictory, and that's why he has his categorical imperative. I think you're right, though. There's something about context that he's not taking into account, which is, in the reality, the person doesn't know. You're dealing with a brute, and they don't understand that maybe you would care about some stranger you never met before, and so you would lie about it. And so, I mean, it's a utilitarian consequence thing that we're appealing to here, but we're saying the better outcome would be that these robbers don't find their victims. So yeah, I don't know. I also dislike Kant. I mean, I'm agreeing with you on that, but his argument is stronger than we're treating it, I think.
Let's navigate more. Go ahead.
I was going to say I'm not sure that Kant thought things could be taken too literally, from what I read of him. Yeah, and the other one I was going to say, I resolve this via my harm metric. Which one produces the greater overall long-term harm? And you choose the one that produces the less harm. If it's lying that produces less harm, you choose lying. If it's truth, you choose truth. It's all based off of long-term harm.
Graham, can I just say something? I was going to say, I haven't said anything all this time, but the thing in this particular instance is the motives are established already. You know that these are robbers and killers, and that the victims are, probably being, that they're in danger. But if the motive wasn't established, if you didn't know that these were killers and thieves, then that would change the entire context of the argument. And the thing is that it's already been preconceived in your mind that the motive. But if you didn't, then what would you do? I suppose it's like you need to know, like your intuition has to tell you something and guide you. So anyway, that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, that's why my kind of go-to reaction to the second group coming is to investigate, to figure out what the heck is going on before I get involved.
But see, the problem is if you use that Socratic method and you start to question them and stuff, they've got weapons, so anything's possible in that situation. It makes it even more complicated. Really.
Yeah, if they have weapons or they exhibit aggressive stances or whatnot, then the investigation is way faster. Let's just say. I would also add that we need to figure out if the situation is in the context of peace and harmony and understanding and diplomacy, or if the situation involves some kind of conflict, either just verbal conflict or even physical conflict or full-blown war. And I'd say that the kinds of nuances and how we let or resolve the moral dilemmas will have to do with that overall context.
But imagine for example, if the actual the way that the supposed victims, imagine in this particular situation, weren't victims, but actually the instigators, and they just painted the other party as the killers and the thieves. And that way, if you actually send them on the wrong direction, you might do the wrong thing because of them misdirecting you from the get-go.
Yeah. If they were police pursuing perpetrators, you didn't even know the crime the first group made. and you see the people wearing uniforms, and you misdirect them? Probably you'll feel like crap if you misdirect the policeman afterwards, if you have kind of a moral compass in you.
Yeah, I think it's just the ambiguity of situations like this. Like sometimes it's really difficult to understand maybe what stance one should take in sort of like when it would normally be a knee-jerk reaction, like what do I do in this moment in time, and trying to place the right action in the right time and place.
Okay, if you guys are okay with this, let's go to the overall context of where this came from in the Mahabharata and what happened actually. So this is a story told by Krishna, in which this dilemma is confronted by a priest who has vowed always to tell the truth. So he's an absolutist in terms of the deontology of truth-telling, of the duty of truth-telling, to be used as a nice, pure example of deontology at work. He duly informs the murderers which way he should go to find their victims. Good though his intentions are, the priest is later sent to hell for his decision. So Krishna is kind of emphasizing that in such a situation where deontology or duty ethics is in conflict with consequentialist ethics in such a blatant way, probably the consequentialist ethics will gain the upper hand and will be more reasonable to use as a yardstick to make a decision in such a case.
Yeah, can I just say you can set up the conflict in either like in purely deontology land or in purely consequentialist land. It's not necessarily a conflict between those frameworks. So you can have consequences where they're bad consequences if you do, and they're bad in a different way consequences if you don't. And like which dilemma, like which way do you go? And you can spell out a duty to protect innocent victims from harm as well, and say, well, you have a duty to protect and you have a duty to tell the truth, and you can have those two duties directly in conflict with each other, so you don't have to appeal to consequences at all. You could say like, well, the right thing to do is to protect, and also the right thing to do is to betray, and like, they can't both be right. They're in conflict in a way.
Nerdalliun, what about the idea of maybe doing nothing?
Yeah, that's what the Jainas came up with. I think Peterson mentions that just very briefly. It is touched on in the Mahabharata, and it's criticized by Krishna that there isn't really anything as inaction, like not taking action in and of itself is a kind of action. Like you're going to be doing something else probably. So like doing nothing, even if you're sitting with your eyes closed, you're sitting with your eyes closed, or if you're lying down with your eyes closed, you're lying down. Like you're doing something. You're not really doing nothing. And so that is also a choice that you're making. And there are many cases in which if you could very easily stop a child from running in front of a bus, and you'd be like, well, it's not my child, and you just watch it run in front of a bus and you watch it get killed, like people won't really say, well, you didn't do anything wrong. People would like, why the fuck didn't you save the child? Like you have a duty to do things sometimes, and inaction can be wrong too.
The burden of doing something, the burden of consequences on you, like you have to act or be damned, sort of thing. I suppose, is this maybe what this pertains to? This particular thing, because if maybe he had, I don't know, like maybe the idea was that like if he hadn't actually, informed the murderers, but he had been inactive. I don't know. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. I just think these are the things that make ethics tricky, and these are the kinds of situations in which people disagree. And so far as I can tell, I think it boils down to people having different priorities. For some people, telling the truth is a great priority, especially I think if they're living in contexts where there's so much dishonesty that the possibility for real relation, like for business and for friendship and for family, has broken down because there's so little trust. they may think like, well, no, lying isn't worth it because lying destroys all of society. I'm kind of guessing.
It might also be in context of the sort of society in which this was actually placed, this situation. So if it was a more warlike kind of nation, and these things happen all the time, then obviously, either the people who are running or also chasing would have a certain, I suppose, awareness of, or it would affect their actions of the way the culture was set up. So they may be like hyper skeptical of anybody, Imagine, for example, if you said, oh, they went that way and they instigated you or beat you up to try and get the real information out of you, with force. So there might not be a chance to actually, I suppose, misdirect them, really.
Yeah, I could see a society where the people running away, it's on them to protect themselves. Like, why are they so weak and pathetic that a band of thieves can so easily rob and murder them? Like, they should have their own friends and their own weapons and their own self-defense. And the priest is there to speak the truth. That's his duty, his role in societies, and it's up to people to fight for himself. It's not up to a priest to fight on behalf of others.
And it could very well be that if he hadn't said something, maybe they would just interrogate him anyway. So
yeah, they might torture him like Peter Adamson mentioned, if he would just stay silent.
I wonder if there's a way to tell the truth as a priest in that situation, to say, if you go that way, something really terrible is going to happen to you. They went that way, but if you go that way, something very terrible is going to happen to you. You're going to commit murder and theft, and that's really, really bad, not for your victims, but for you. I wonder what would happen if he just started talking like that.
Might they reply?
I won't tell you which direction they went because I want to save you from catastrophe.
Like, kind of inform them of the consequences of their actions being morally wrong.
Yeah, you're talking about karma, basically.
Yeah, but I wonder if he could give them an honest answer why he won't tell them.
And that could dissuade their actions, I suppose, if they were really earnest enough to listen, or even held that priest's, I suppose, place in society in high regard. Maybe they'd be like, oh, okay, well, maybe we should listen to the priest. It would depend on their motivations and character, I suppose.
I would tell you, and you could go and I'm sure you'd be successful, but I happen to know something you don't know. There's a catastrophe waiting for you if you go that way, and I want to save you from that. Let me tell you about it. And then,
yeah,
I don't know.
My
they might kill him for it.
Yeah, my anticipated reaction is that the priest, that the murderers are just going to sit there, listen to the priest, going to say thanks, laugh at him, and go off and commit the murder.
That's if he
that's what I think. I would think that.
They would say, this is just another Tuesday.
They'd be like, there's nothing that can prevent us from getting what we want. We're warriors. Yeah, and just go on.
And body count. They have a large body count. It's just another one.
That's right. He'd definitely have to not tell them which way they went before he told them why he's not telling them. And you're right. Probably they just chop his head off, but
they'll probably say, well, catastrophe will befall you if you don't tell us. That's where it's
right.
What you could do is you could play Rosenberg and do nonviolent communication with them and say, like, when you ask me when those other people, which way they're headed, I feel a little nervous because I'm afraid that bad things might happen. And I feel a little conflicted about what I should do about it. I'm curious about what your motives are for wanting to know where the other people is. Can you help me understand, please, and try to have a nonviolent communication discussion with them? I think that'll probably go bad also. But
yeah,
I think you need to explore exactly what their needs are. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, you could. What about this for an alternate option? What if you had like a bunch of money or something like that, and you said, "Look, I can actually give you something to not go in that direction." Like if you almost like bribe them or something, with gold or
probably
certainly
that would not be the priest. It would have to be another character.
Yeah, true. Not a priest, obviously, and not to mention he would probably taken a vow of poverty. But it would have been. But if someone,
it would need to be somebody who they weren't going to take the money from and just go off and murder the guy anyway.
Yeah.
So it would be laughably naive laughably naive for anybody to think that this group of vicious criminals are going to like being preached to by this priest. But the fact that he's willing to take his life into his own hands to do that would be somewhat impressive. Like I don't think they look at him like he's a retard. I think they look at him like, where the hell did you get the balls to not do? Obviously, we're going to kill you if you don't tell us. And so maybe doubling down on the truth that doesn't say which way they went is your best option.
Well, what about this for a moral question? Honor, or just, I suppose, common sense. Should you do things for an honorable reason, knowing that you're brave and you may die, or most certainly will die, or perhaps I suppose what's that? Discretion is the better part of valor, and just sort of not do that, even though your pride is on the line.
Well, that's what the priest does, and then he goes to hell for it. I mean, we're right. The story's telling us that that's exactly what he does. Now, maybe we don't believe it, but he says, "All right, look, this isn't my battle. You guys are going to get your way either way. So yeah, they went that way. Leave me alone. I'm going to go to my temple and do my thing." The point of the story is to tell us that's not good enough. We might disagree with the story, but yeah, that's definitely the setup of the story.
So do you think because so his honor overcomes actually common sense in that particular regard, and because what he thinks, it's like a misplaced sense of, I suppose, his own notions of divinity, and he thinks that he's doing the right things for the wrong. He's doing like many people, doing the wrong thing for what they believe are the right reasons. Yeah,
there are things worse than death. I mean, the whole point of having a hell story is to make the point of there's something worse than death.
Yeah,
so if you're gonna do the calculation of what's the smartest thing for self-preservation for me to do, if you're doing that in a naive way where you're not taking into account that living the rest of your life as a coward because you've enacted cowardice is probably worse than just being killed.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But then would it be so misplaced in his mind that he thought that he wasn't being a coward because he was honoring his God, but then later, he at the end of his life, and when he dies, he learns that was not in fact the truth.
The gods aren't happy.
This is the lesson for So.
What do the gods want is a question that probably will torment humanity forever and without a definite answer.
I wonder, imagine you're a priest, you have a position of some sort of respect and authority in the community, and you have to live with yourself as a coward who can do no good for anybody because force is all that really matters. And you made an agreement with that principle when you were confronted with force. And you said, yeah, I talk a good story about the gods and everything, and some little old ladies come and listen to me on the weekend, but that's about all I'm really good for. You have to live like that the rest of your life. That's hell.
What about this though? Okay, because he actually just went ahead and told the truth as he took the vow to. If he hadn't told the truth, would he then be self-condemning for the rest of his life because he'd broken his own vows? That could be another option, but then he might have gone to heaven.
Maybe he would have hell during life, but avoid hell after life or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, this is interesting. He vowed to always tell the truth. I didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
I have a suspicion with the way this piece of literature was written, it would be totally in line with them to have a very similar setup with a different priest who lies and who also goes to hell.
Yes. Oh, certainly. Yeah. It's too complicated. It's not. Yeah, absolutely. We could tell a dozen stories about doing either one the wrong way. It reminds me of the religious story, the parable where Christ said the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, right? This is a religious story that's saying, okay, the vow to tell the truth is a religious thing you've committed to. If you don't remember that that's in service to a greater ethic and you make that your idol, you're on the wrong path. You're headed to hell. There's some mistake here.
Speaking of which, there's even a story in the Pentateuch where the Israelites are invaded in a Sabbath and they refuse to defend themselves. because it's a Sabbath, and they are mostly slaughtered because of adhering so strictly to their kind of code of duty.
Is this is really then a subject of honor and pride for one's beliefs, or what you deem ethical or moral, really? The pride of it, the arrogance, and it being misplaced because you're not looking at the totality of the consequences before you.
Yeah, and it's a warning that even something good can be made into an idol, right? Even your virtues, you could make an idol out of them rather than remembering that they're for a greater thing.
And instead of them being something active, an active process, they become something crystallized and inactive and stagnate.
So this could be like people being a little bit of slaves to tradition in a way. Yeah.
Let's proceed, because I think I am anticipating that with further context and further information, and speaking of ethics even more, we will get more stuff to talk about. So in the Mahabharata, the myth maker enters the plot of his own myth. As I mentioned before, Vyasa enters related to the origin of the Kauravas to advise their mother. Krishna, within the story, tells other stories, as we've just seen this one. Mahabharata is fundamentally about elusiveness of truth and ambiguity of moral rightness. So as you've experienced, we didn't come out of this thought experiment fully satisfied, rather maybe more in a state of aporia, like at the end of the dialogues of Plato. Plot is often driven forward by lies, tricks, and subterfuge. So even we will see there are stalemates when everyone is following their codes strictly, and the action only goes forward significantly when people decide to rupture with their code of honor or something like that. And so there's this concept of dharma, which Peter Adamson and Ganeri explain that it rather means to preserve or support. So it's on the surface. On the surface, dharma means duty, but duty to what? In general, to preserve or support something. And he also compared to a term in Zoroastrianism that he did not disclose. So the single god Ahura Mazda of Zoroastrianism holds the heavens so that they do not fall. It's kind of his duty. So as the gods have this duty to preserve the cosmic order, human beings should take a hint and also conduct their affairs so as to contribute to the preservation of harmony and order. And it is contrasted with the law of the fish, which is kind of a dog-eat-dog situation. Might makes right, Thrasymachus and whatnot. And then there's the contrast of dharma and adharma. So praiseworthy actions that are related to piety, and actions earning rebuke where the person is failing to align themselves with whatever is the highest value or most fundamental principle in the cosmos. And
it seems like
so,
in between all this, like the choices are rather nebulous because of the whim of the gods. This idea that there are the higher principles, and then there's I suppose the reality of human existence, and sort of trying to negotiate your way between the two seems quite ambiguous in this particular. I suppose maybe is this like more to inform the reader of like the questions that one should ask themselves about choices they make in spite of the divinity, or want to humanize the divine in a way, because like that we were talking earlier about that, the human qualities of these gods. Anyway,
at least it certainly had this effect on myself. These do not kind of give you a clear-cut answer to address similar situations in your life, but they will kind of instigate you to think about these questions, these issues. So maybe it will help when real life situations happen, and you might have a better chance of answering them in a more straightforward fashion, and
You know what?
perhaps with less regret.
I've got an idea here. Perhaps what it is actually to train the response time between like these lessons, like, you know, of good or evil, or what it means to actually when we act, if it's a good action or an evil action, and the fact that there is much trickery and deception within this book. The idea of training people in order to react more expediently when the weight of these choices are upon them and they're forced to act immediately. So like it's because, you know, in that particular case we're talking about before, when the soldiers come up and they're like, hey, we want those people, where do they go? You've got to act with split second timing, because if you think the wrong thing, and I suppose this is like the moral, the mental preparedness or mindfulness where that comes in, where you can then, your actions are then sort of tempered like steel when you actually sort of, so you are aware of the trickery of the world and also of the divinity as well, but the difference between the two, perhaps. I'm sorry, just let me know if I'm talking too much, because I'm sort of.
No, you're right.
Okay.
So Zara, as you wrote, you say that virtue ethics is kind of like the bottleneck here. When virtue ethics is crappy, utilitarianism and deontology probably won't execute very well. But if virtue ethics is better, probably things will tend to have better outcomes. Is that right?
Yeah, so we were arguing against Kant, and we were bringing in some utilitarian. All of us were bringing in utilitarianism, anything to argue against his idea that you can never lie, even in a situation where you're protecting Anne Frank in the attic from Nazis. It's like, well, there's something wrong with you, Kant, obviously, but we kept resorting to utilitarianism. It's important to notice that utilitarians and deontologists, they can understand habit, and they can understand that that's an important thing to integrate based on their overarching higher principle. But to me, what you were just talking about is a characterological thing. It's virtue ethics. It's be a good person, because you're not going to have time to do a utilitarian calculus, and you're not going to have time to weigh out the arguments. You have to become you have to become the type of character that is responding in real time in the world, and the universe is not going to give you time to think about things. I think that's dead on balls accurate. You hit the nail on the head with that.
Cheers. Yeah, I think that's, you know, for me, I just sort of think that maybe that's what you're all here for, you know, and as students of philosophy.
Don't give away the game. Shh. Don't. Socrates admitted that on his deathbed. You're not supposed to let people know our philosophy is.
Oh, right. I hate it. Just disregard the life you're Don't worry about that, guys. I'm with the show.
Nerdalliun, you also wanted to make a point, all right?
Yeah. So definitely, I think one of the great benefits of discussing stories like this and doing some of the reasoning beforehand is so that if in the future we face similar decisions, we can make them faster and hopefully better. The stories have another way of, like, another benefit for compressing time. So it's not just shortening the time when we have to make a decision for us arriving at the decision by prior to the decision doing some work and practicing and cultivating good habits. I think also after we've made decisions and things have gone a certain way, we can reflect on them in ways that wasn't possible. And also we can sort of distill some insights for both ourselves and for future generations that can make it possible within one lifetime to really benefit from the wisdom of very many lifetimes. And I think that's more or less what's happening in this tradition with the Vedas, this being called like the fifth Veda. Like, this is a rich culture of people telling stories, and no doubt inspired by real life ethical dilemmas. And like, they've fought plenty real wars, and there were plenty real intrigues in courts, and there were plenty times people faced conflicting motivations regarding their role in society and, say, more personal things, or if they have ambiguous roles in societies, say duties to family versus duties to their caste. And yeah, so people were facing these kinds of dilemmas, and they were telling stories of characters that were also facing these dilemmas. And I think they were discussing that, and like after hearing the story and sort of wrestling with those dilemmas by telling the stories. And yeah, I think the way the Mahabharata is presented is that like these dilemmas don't necessarily have like clear-cut resolutions either way. So there's not necessarily a place you reach where you can make the right decision quickly. Like you have to make some kind of decision, and you might as well not spend too much time on it. I think that's what Krishna says, and we'll get into more detail on that if we look at the Gita a bit later.
There's just one last thing I want to say, Nerdalliun, is when we're talking about this sort of stuff, I think what these stories probably tell us, or any parable or any story or any tale or myth or whatever, is that they change our associations to our value upon certain things. So it's a value system change, and the associations or patterns in our brain would probably change to different associations. So it's like, okay, well, if you hadn't probably read the story, then you wouldn't value the outcome of a situation that may be similar in your own life, or you may be unprepared for it. You know, so it's a shift, or I suppose a paradigm shift towards that new way of thinking. And it's a pattern.
Or you might not even notice that there's a call for you to become kind of like a hero's call. You might go through life and this thing is calling you in certain situations, and you aren't even aware of what's going on. You aren't even aware that there's a moral dilemma.
Exactly. Because you could just be so in the dark and never know. And I think that's the beauty of the stories, you know, is that these characters that are larger than life, they mean so much more usually than the sum of, like, I suppose, just the parts of what makes an individual. Like it's so much more. It's so broader. It's like actually a kind of critique upon reality itself. Some of these gods and some of these deities that we look at, even superheroes and stuff, like what they're about is so much bigger than just any one human. But we can look through that lens and go, wow, you know, that's a admirable quality to possess, even if it's unachievable. You know, doggo.
Oops. Yeah, it's a bit like you're trying, people who are creating these stories in whatever form they might be, written, film, whatever, even song. They are trying to simulate bits and pieces of human nature in different contexts and clashing different characters together, etc., to try to simulate what goes on. And this simulation might yield lessons. It might yield lessons either in ethics, morals, or also in human nature itself. And if the story is really well constructed, it probably yields more lessons than typical. Perhaps that is one of the reasons why we call these texts epics, because they are so dense and rich with lessons in many different dimensions, like the ones that I've showed you in the previous slide. In contrast to less worthy literature that is more constructed as escapism and whatnot, and although probably inescapably it does have lessons, but it's kind of more barren in that regard.
So it's the type of literature that probably would be better for humanity, the one where you step away from it and you've learned a moral lesson, or you contemplate the lesson to be learned, and you think, what is this tale? What is this depiction? Tell me about myself and my place in the world. You know, I think that could possibly be the best form of literature, is when you really question your place and how you fit in with everything else and everybody around you. It's like, what even is this thing? You know, I think at the end of it, like, where do I fit? Yeah.
That's almost Hindu philosophy, at least so far in a nutshell. They really emphasize asking what is the self and its place in the cosmos, with way more emphasis than we've seen in ancient Greece. So
Yeah,
let's proceed. Go ahead, Nerdalliun.
No, I was just going to make an offhand joke and say, and then Buddha comes around and spoils everything and say, you have no self.
However, it seems that the no self thing came later, and at least so far as I've investigated, it seems like that. It seems a more later kind of doctrine than him. But for sure, there's a lot of anti-narcissistic kind of doctrine there, even if it doesn't go so far as to complete self-denial. But yeah. Let's go. If you want to find words, don't ask a grammarian, but find people who are agreed to be excellent users of language, like we learned from Panini. If you want ethics, don't ask a philosopher, but find people who are agreed to be ethical. So yeah, part of what ethics is also finding people to model. And finding people to model also helps with virtue ethics, because if you know where to go in terms of your character development, you are much better prepared to engage on a daily basis in character development. And so in the Mahabharata, there are 3 paths in life, and I've added a 4th one because for the sake of the Jainas. So first one is Dharma, moral correctness; Artha, practical advantage. We got that from studying Chanakya's Artha Shastra. Kama, pleasure. Probably we will go into this with the Charvakas, which are the Hindu hedonists. Then there's moksha, liberation. That was the emphasis of the Jainas, and in another sense with a different word by the Buddhists as well. And the thing here, here we start a different kind of story, a different kind of moral dilemma. So before we start this different kind of moral dilemma, I will give you guys an opportunity to comment. Otherwise, we will go into it. Okay, let's go into it. So Pandavas versus Drona. As I've mentioned, Drona was the martial arts instructor, kind of guru of both parties, and he sided with the Kauravas. And he's a very tough guy, very difficult to win. So Krishna advising the Pandavas: he cannot in any way be defeated by force in battle. Casting aside virtue, O Pandavas, resort to a method fit for victory, so that Drona might not kill everyone in battle. I think that he will not fight if his son were killed. Let some men say that he has been slain in battle. So kind of grieve him and give him grief, so that he will lay down his weapons. And Arjuna's reaction is no way, Bhima. Yes way, because Bhima is all about fighting and might and strength. Yudhishthira is torn, because Yudhishthira is kind of similar to that priest. He made an explicit point to be always truthful, and this would probably mean, if he got involved, to go against this this precept, this code of always telling the truth. And so then there's the Pandavas versus the Duryodhana, which is the leader of the Pandavas, and Krishna advises them: when enemies become too numerous and powerful, they should be slain by deceit and stratagems. This is the path formerly trodden by the gods to slay the demons, and the path trodden by the virtuous may be trodden by all. If it's so, my question here, after seeing this in the episode, if it's good enough for the gods, then it's good enough for us. So depends if we are getting a good role model, a really fit role model in the form of gods. And it's also important to break down the different ethical frameworks. So, for instance, when duty and aspired consequences clash, as we've seen about consequentialism, use your brain instead of mindlessly running ethics code. And the character worth its salt is crucial to be able to wisely navigate dilemmas. And in times of war or in contexts of conflict in general, it seems that ethical systems tend to clash more often. And so here are the ethical systems: virtue or character ethics; dharma, duty, deontology ethics; consequentialist, of which utilitarian is an example; to maximize happiness. And then there's divine command or divine mandate ethics, or the mandate of heaven ethics, as comes from the Chinese. So in a broad sense, we have these four kind of advisors to our mind, as it were, and we can pay heed to them. We can listen to only one of them and just stop thinking and follow this advisor to the fullest extent, or we can listen to all of them and try to decide like as a wise king would decide with four advisors. Perhaps virtue character is the most close to the king. Maybe it's the king himself, because it's his wisdom, his qualities of character, and so it will determine how prepared he is for the dilemmas and how wise he is to judge the advice from each of the other frameworks of ethics. So this is kind of my take on this, my attempt to wrestle with these dilemmas, these moral quandaries. And so, yeah, I'll shut up and give you guys also the chance.
I was just curious. I just said something in chat to Zara. I said the question is, without society or anyone else here, is there any, like, I suppose, inherent just within nature, our instincts, or our just way of being, a role model while we're alive? If there's like some blank role model, and there isn't, like this is all, I suppose, attributed through our lives. So there is no. It's all trial and error, and I suppose it's represented within these things, so we can develop ethics and stuff. So it's all just someone had to learn a whole bunch of lessons before they could write a lot of this stuff to begin with, and kind of through the consequences of their own actions and learning from their own flaws or overcoming their own, lesser traits, they had to get somewhere with it. But I just find it interesting that, like, really there is no role model aside from the one that we focus on, or it's just a complete blank slate without all of this. Am I getting nihilistic here? Sorry.
A blank slate without all of what?
Well, the role modeling, the stories,
okay.
the anything we learn from, like, I mean, look, if we didn't have language, I mean, do you think that animals have role models? I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like,
I think they might dream of them, but they never put them in art and sculpture, so we don't know what their stories are. But
exactly. That's
I do think they have them functionally within the groups. I mean, you have alpha males among the primates. You got leader of the pack among wolves and dogs.
But is that just
usually
Is that just an inherent, like, status though, or is that actually role modeling?
I think it's probably characterologically modeled.
I'm wondering how much of role modeling isn't a translation of that concept onto more of that intellectual plane.
Because some people have inherent status, which can, just like the alpha male, in a wolf pack or something, they're the strongest wolf there. But the thing is that I know my name's Wolfy, but the thing is you've got the idea is that they're just by default the biggest and the strongest, and they can wield all that power. But I mean, I suppose you got the clever one as well, and there's different tiers of that. But I don't know where I'm.
And over time, it changes. You've ever watched those old National Geographics and all those things where the older, the alpha male gets old and then gets taken down by a new one who now becomes the alpha male.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And he takes them down by patterning after the alpha male and just becoming the better alpha male. So, I said,
and this is so okay. So is that really what this is all about, though?
Look at what we have with the gods. We had Krishna as an avatar of Vishnu, according to some parties, like the German National Socialist Party interpreted them as untainted monotheism that has not been yet changed by the Semite people. Then we also had Ahura Mazda by the Zoroastrianisms, also maybe one of the most ancient monotheistic gods. Yahweh, of course, who we only call God nowadays. So the branding has been so effective that God is the name of God. That's full stop. or Allah. And basically, this is like the alpha male in the ethics landscape, I'd say.
But it's almost like a succession of traditions reinventing themselves over and over again and taking the very best from each tradition and just exalting it. I think, you look at that when from everything I've seen through the philosophy, I suppose seminars or what the discussions here, it seems to be like a constant momentum towards, I suppose, building upon the failings of the past or recreating or shedding skin and like becoming something new, metamorphosis into something else. But then I just wonder, is that just human ego to stamp someone's name into something? Like, I suppose you said that stuff about what Aristotle kind of doing that with, was it Plato and or Socrates? I can't remember which one it was. How he sort of he almost made it out that all these philosophical lessons were his own, and he wouldn't give credit where it was due. And I just wonder, like, if these different faiths that are interrelated, obviously there's a battle there. There's a battle to, hey, this is the most celebrated form of this role modeling or storytelling. Listen to this form of it, and instead of like kind of getting, I think I don't know what I'm saying here. I'm not sure exactly where this leads.
Let me try to compliment you. Look at what a god is. Fundamentally, what is a god? So a god boils down to kind of an idealized being, which is potentially a role model. Also, he's a very authoritative mouthpiece, or tends to be in different traditions, and also might be a kind of life advice instructor as well. So all these fundamental dimensions seem inextricably connected to different types of gods, especially the ones that are really that really stand the test of time. And so I think it is people kind of realizing that they are basically living in an imperfect realm where they are not able to be perfect, and they're trying to reach out to a realm of perfection, which probably will always be conceptual and metaphysical. People like Spinoza tries to conceptualize a god for himself, a personal god, as an outcast outside of his congregation, and with that he got some yields, really interesting yields, ethics wise. And so I think that one of the worthwhile investments that any individual sentient being can do is try to picture himself times 1 million or more in terms of quality of character, and probably that will be your superhero or your god. And if you are in the virtue character path, probably it will inform you in which direction are you supposed to improve your character. When you are faced with these dilemmas, possibly it will help you consequentialist and utilitarian kind of way, because you will maybe ask yourself, okay, so if this higher being were in my shoes, what would he do? And also you would be able to kind of have a dialogue with this conceptual being to figure out your svadharma and other kinds of dharma, your personal dharma, your individual duty as an individual.
I suppose that as students of philosophy, this is the discernment that takes place to, I suppose, correlate and figure out what are the best types of virtues or ethics to hold on to, given the overwhelming amount of information thrown in your direction. There's just so much of it. So it must be like, it's really what you guys are doing, I think, here. It's just picking this all to pieces and going, okay, well, where is it at? Where's the meat?
Yeah, Wolfy, if you don't mind, I'd like to say what you just before Rogério answered, you sort of indicated that you're not exactly sure where your line of questioning was leading to. So I'll maybe say,
go for it.
My interpretation of your line of questioning. I may be projecting, so you can correct me if I'm wrong.
That's fine.
So you started out with the question of basically, are there any natural role models without society? And kind of followed that up with asking the question, are these role models just an ego trip and people sort of putting their own ideals in images? And so those two questions, maybe to rephrase them, is I could say, ask, is this all business of gods and morality and ethics just social construction with no real authority behind it?
Exactly.
Or is it just an ego trip, a status game?
And
those are actual questions in sort of very current contemporary philosophy. So I think people often branded as a postmodernist would just say, like, yeah, that's just social construction and it's all just a status game. I think the way I think about it is partly they're social constructions and partly there are status games. I think they're richer than just that. And I kind of liked where Rogério ended up, and I think I'll end up in a similar place, but I'm going to maybe step a little back and lead up to that same place. And sort of think about like what role models are and why we use the word role models. So if there were in society, first of all, we need to kind of bear with the grant an impossible fiction here, because like you will not reach adulthood without other people. Like human babies are pathetic, you will not survive. So you're going to need adults, other human adults, to at least become an adult yourself. And
what about Spartans, where they were supposedly raised by wolves and stuff?
Yeah, that didn't really happen. Human babies don't reach adulthood without other people. That's never happened. That will never happen.
Right. Okay.
So just in this fictional land, you're an adult and there's no society and there are no other people. You can ask, are there role models? That sort of had me questioning like what a role model even is. And what there will be is there will be imitation. So animals definitely imitate each other, and you would be free to imitate a bunch of things. You could try to imitate any of various kinds of animals around you, or you could even imitate rivers, like Bruce Lee said, flow like water, or you could be more like a mountain, so you can take inspiration for how you want to be and try to imitate that. But that would be from the side of the imitator. And I think part of the reason the term role modeling came up is because people wanted to word for like the other side of that equation, when leaders act in specific ways knowing that they will be imitated. They're doing something in order to be imitated. The verb word for acting in a way that you know will be imitating is called modeling. So you can do that intentionally. You are modeling behavior for other people. And then the role is just sort of a way to, in a small number of categories, place like a set of behaviors that go together. So you can ask, what's the role of fatherhood? There are certain sets of behaviors that people stereotypically think goes along with that. Or what's the role of a doctor? Or what's the role of a policeman? And so you have just these categories to package things in ways that are a little easier to think about than all of the infinite number of ways you could behave in the world. And so if you have a role model for a policeman, that would be someone behaving in a way that I guess people would say either that person wants other people to imitate them or is worthy of being imitated. And that's not necessarily an ego trip on the person saying that. You could, like someone who's not a policeman can be very thankful for a very good policeman, and then sort of shine a light on that person and say, like, we want more police people like that person. And so you can sort of praise and adore people who are behave in ways that are advantageous and excellent to either you, and that could be selfish, or it could be for your children. You could like, I want my children to grow up in a world with more policemen like that. It could be for the community.
I see both sides of that.
Yeah. And so, like, when it comes to these things just being social constructions and just being ego trips, I don't think so. And I think if you sort of pay attention, you'll find yourself imitating people subconsciously. Like if you sort of clock in with yourself, how did I used to behave? You'll sometimes find yourself speaking in a tone of voice that reminds you of someone else that you've never done before, or you'll find yourself making expressions or gestures with your hands or something that you picked up from someone else unwillingly. And you can learn about your own values by sort of paying attention to who you automatically imitate. That can tell you something about who you subconsciously admire. And that's the way in which, like, animals probably when they imitate the pack leader, that they're probably not thinking in linguistic narrative terms that they could spell out to you, oh, I think that wolf is doing a really good job of role modeling fatherhood in a wolf, or like pack leader in a wolf. They just instinctively admire and instinctively copy the behavior in a way that's similar to when we subconsciously copy behavior.
I just wonder if that's survival. If that's just a survival mechanism.
It's partly a survival mechanism, but it's like when you say just, like the danger with using just is to sort of imply that ultimately it's meaningless and valueless. And I think if you look at yourself, you'll find that you care about these things probably, and I care about these things, and we care about it for complicated reasons, like we not only selfish reasons, but almost certainly also selfish reasons, and almost certainly also because we're influenced by things like peer pressure, almost also certainly because we have egos and we want status, and so we're driven to increase our own status, but also most of us have some amount of care, like just intrinsically for other people's sake, whether it be children or whether it be puppies or whether it be communities and stuff. We can look at a well-functioning company, and having had experience in 100 very toxic companies, we can just be glad that there exists in the world a business where things aren't horribly toxic and like people are working together and making products that are valuable, and we can like feel happy about that, even though we have nothing to do with that business. We don't purchase those products. We can just be like, we want more of this stuff in the world because this is good.
I think the thing is, what you're really saying here is that it's all good, even if it is a status thing. If it has inherent virtue, and I suppose it's a right thing, if it's a good thing, if it's good, then it doesn't necessarily matter if it has an attribute of status, because it's just the mechanics of how society works, and it's just the way we are as living as civilized individuals. It's
like the status thing is probably incidental or accidental. It's not essential to the main meaning of the thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, to me, it's a lot like organizing society. And how are you going to organize society in the way that causes the least pain to society as a whole? And a lot of times you do have to organize in order to have leaders telling other people what to do. That's what some species have found works for them, like primates are obviously one of them. So that's why we have that inherent, substructure, emotional structure in us, but we also have that conscious level that we can take control and override those instincts. We're not as ruled by the alpha male and all those instincts as the animals are. That's where our consciousness comes into play, and that's what we should be focusing on. And I think that's what they're trying to focus on in the Mahabharata, just a full circle tag there.
I hope I'm raising some good topics. I'm sort of this is my real first time being part of these, but I hope I'm contributing.
Yeah,
you're doing great.
I want to appreciate. Yeah, you're doing great. Yeah,
thanks. Cheers. I'm just winging it. But,
What comes next is the Bhagavad Gita. So let's get into the Bhagavad Gita, or the Song of the Lord. So I knew the name Bhagavad Gita, and I was surprised with Peter Adamson's episode. He explained it finally. It means the Song of the Lord. Gita is song, and Bhagavad is the Lord. And so I also knew from Aldous Huxley about the Bhagavad Gita. He quotes several passages in his perennial philosophy. He was not just the science fiction author many people popularly know him for. He also did extensive mysticism, religious comparison, tradition work in his perennial philosophy. And he I quote him by saying, the philosophy of the Upanishads reappears, developed and enriched in the Bhagavad Gita. So, and probably also the Mahabharata in general, was infused with lessons from the more esoteric Upanishads, which became way more exoteric in the Mahabharata as an epic that is more openly available.
So just a quick comment about that.
Right,
the first Vedas were composed, like the best guess that I can remember of is around 1500 BCE to maybe around 800 BCE, and then there was a period of commentaries and additions that I'm a little hazy on. I think the Upanishads were considered the third or the fourth Vedas.
Fourth.
the fourth Vedas, and they were composed roughly between, I think, 700 BCE and 200 BCE. And this Mahabharata, the best guesses for when it was composed was sometime between 400 BCE and 400 AD. So just roughly get the timeline right. So it makes sense that like the fifth Veda could have been basically a retelling of some of the similar stories that were told in the original Vedas, but sort of incorporating some of the insights that were elaborated and explained in the commentaries on the earlier Vedas. So yeah, just say what Aldous Huxley is saying about like, so the Upanishads themselves were commentaries on earlier stories, Vedas, and so this is maybe like a redo of the story after the commentaries have sort of highlighted some philosophical insights into those stories.
Adamson mentions that scholars mostly agree, that the Mahabharata receives many updates, and probably updates that have swollen the Mahabharata to a mind-numbing, earth-shattering size. And one of the sources was probably the Upanishads. And maybe the Mahabharata already existed in some other form before the Upanishads, either written explicitly or as an oral tradition, probably. But it received updates. Probably there are many authors involved in the Mahabharata by this point. Maybe hundreds or perhaps even thousands.
Yeah, and so in this case we have fairly strong scholarship indicating multiple authorships, although inside the tradition it's attributed to one bard. So we have officially one bard who's telling the story, but truly like many people composing it. And the fact that seems to be a bit of a norm in Indian philosophy and Indian religion, to sort of have multiple people contribute to the authorship of a thing, and then the work being attributed to one person, is one of the sources why I think very likely something similar happened in Buddhism, where you had very many monks and philosophers likely contributing to what was called Buddha words. I'm sorry, I'm kind of going back to a topic we discussed last time, but attributing that to one teacher, the Buddha.
And things developed afterwards, after his life, even. Yeah, and also there's another example outside of India. The Epic of Gilgamesh is also considered by scholars to have had many hands, not just one author. And also the Iliad and Odyssey, we attribute it to Homer, but it's likely that it emerged from that tradition of these kinds of rap battles of rhapsodists, in which they would compete to praise the gods with more epithets. And probably there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of tradition, oral tradition there by many authors. And maybe there was a compiler or not called Homer, but probably there was more than one person involved. And the Bible is blatantly, of course, many authors. Yeah.
But even individual books, I think I was told this is what happened with the Book of Solomon. Like, he had a reputation as a wise person, and people would come up with aphorisms, and then to give weight of authority to the aphorism, attribute the authorship to Solomon, even though there was no evidence that Solomon ever said anything like it. And people still kind of do that thing today. If they find a clever meme, they will attribute it to someone with a fancy sounding name.
Like the Einstein memes. Einstein said everything, or Abraham Lincoln, or whatnot. Yeah. People like to find, when they find a nice mouthpiece, be it these thinkers who already died, like Einstein or Abraham Lincoln, or a celebrity, they leap at the opportunity to use them as mouthpieces. So
sort of like Plato did with Socrates' tag.
Yep. So it's a really at hand authoritative figure, actually a real living human being who historically existed and is ready to use. So why let it go to waste? And probably this happens in many different traditions. And then we have Robert Oppenheimer, who is now on the conscience of many people due to cinematic reasons. Now I'm become death, the destroyer of worlds. So the words preferred by Krishna during the Bhagavad Gita. And my kind of theory of how the Bhagavad Gita emerged was the Bhagavad Gita was not present in the start of the Mahabharata, in the first version of the Mahabharata, the original version. In the original version, maybe Krishna did have a moment of self-doubt, but then he resolved it by himself. But then maybe some really brilliant and literary genius of a monk or more of them wrote this really incredibly inspiring piece of life advice. And then his or their supervisor looked at it and said, wow, this is amazing. This is incredible. Imagine if this was actually said to Arjuna to help him resolve his moral conflict in that scene, and then he goes, wait, and then they grafted it onto the Mahabharata, and there it is, the Bhagavad Gita. So this is, of course, wild speculation, but who knows with the updates it got throughout the centuries. Who knows what kind of things appeared? But truth be told, it is really a literature masterpiece. This part of the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, and it all boils down to a situation in which Arjuna, the notable archer, to the left here, is in his chariot, and he's in the middle of the two armies, the army of the Pandavas and the army of the Kauravas, and he has a moment of doubting that his duty is actually to kill his brethren on the other side, the side of the Kauravas, despite them being kind of vicious, but he still has his thinks about his skin. And so his charioteer is actually the avatar of God, basically. And his charioteer starts... so basically the idea is reluctant to kill his family members, law of the warrior versus law of kinship, which means Kshatriya Dharma versus Kula Dharma in Sanskrit terms. And my go-to expression here is, in case of inner conflict, break glass. And the glass is the glass that covers the God. And so in the story, Krishna reveals his divine self and overwhelms Arjuna, who listens attentively, reverently to what Krishna, now revealed to be the avatar of Vishnu, has to say. And so the first question is, why should we undertake any action at all? For Arjuna's situation in particular, why battle? Why go to war? And so, as I mentioned, there's this idea that many scholars with different agendas made the Bhagavad Gita. And then Krishna becomes a kind of chorus, or what Krishna's words become a kind of chorus, a kind of a summation of different viewpoints to offer a single unified basis for Arjuna's action. And so the flow of kind of arguments from Krishna goes a bit like this. So stop acting like a eunuch, which is appealing to the Kshatriya Dharma of Arjuna. It didn't work because then Arjuna says, well, they are my family and such. And so he then lowers the stakes by saying, if you kill them, they will reincarnate. So the true self is invulnerable. It doesn't get burned by fire, it doesn't get wet by water, it doesn't get stabbed by swords. So he kind of lowers the concerns regarding Kula Dharma of Arjuna. And then he goes on to say, no one, whether warrior or peasant, should act with an eye to the fruits of their action. So going more to the direction of Swadharma, so the personal duties that transcend family and caste. And then whatever you do, think of me and follow my example. So the end is just, well, if you really are confused, reorient yourself to the divine, reorient yourself to whatever it is that is sublime and essential about the cosmos, whatever it might be, which is called bhakti in the Sanskrit term. And so I found this really interesting, how to kind of segment the Bhagavad Gita into these different arguments step by step, landing in more or less divine ethics land, divine command ethics lands, but without kind of separating it from the other forms of ethics, to use it as a guiding or as a compass to guide the other forms of ethics. So yeah, I'll shut up now and let you guys disagree with me, comment, or ask questions, whatever.
Yeah, I'm a little curious about the literary significance of using Vishnu as the mouthpiece for this. So Vishnu being one of the
Trimurti.
Of the Trimurti. So the other options would be Brahma and Shiva. It makes a bit of sense why they didn't use Shiva, like a counterintuitive bit of sense, because like this is a war and Shiva is supposedly the destroyer. So it would be a kind of a boring story to just have the destroyer be like, yeah, go ahead, destroy. Come on, let's get this. I want you to destroy. I think that would be so to have the preserver argue in favor of war, I think introduces an interesting dialectic. Like you'd expect the preserver to say war is a bad thing. Can you guys cut this out, please? Like just intuitively, like the aspect of people who want to preserve things and to nurture things and to take care of things as they are. To have that side of humanity say like, no, this war is kind of destined to happen, and then almost playing the role of preserving destiny, even though destiny involves a lot of destruction. And saying,
but maybe less destruction than if they let the Kauravas continue to wreak havoc, and the war being more longer than it should be. Basically, a shorter war, even if intense, is better than a prolonged war. In a sense, maybe that's an argument for why Vishnu is chosen here as a big mouthpiece.
Yeah, there are realities that we like to be blind to, that we think to ourselves, well, a lot of the moral superiority we feel for people even in the recent past is just due, I think, to the fact that we're blind to the realities of how harsh life can be at times. I want to say to Roger, you get to have your cake and eat it too. I hasten to give you this precious gift here. Just because we're talking about divinity doesn't mean we're in divine command theory of ethics, right? When Krishna says, whatever you do, think of me and follow my example, this is virtue ethics. Just because it's being depicted in a narrative religious format, it's saying be this type of character. Divine command theory, philosophically, right? That's saying what is good is what the God tells me is good by definition. So if God tells me to kill my son, that becomes the good thing to do, right? That's divine command theory. That's very different from a depiction of virtue ethics, even if it's being depicted in a narrative and religious context. So I think you get to have it both ways here.
Yeah, especially if you are the one conceptualizing the God.
What do you mean?
Like Spinoza did. Spinoza conceptualized the most perfect being of a God that he could.
Well, that's
worked for him.
That's what these storytellers are trying to do. They're wrestling with trying to get the right picture, as was brought up. Well, where's the role model? Where's the ultimate role model? Well, they're trying to get at it, and they're revising their stories over millennia to try to depict maybe not one role model. Sometimes it takes all types, and there's multiple ways of being in the world that have to interact in concert with each other, perhaps. But in any case, they're trying to get at the right way to be. And so when you meditate on and focus on the story and relate to the character, and parts of their character resonates with you, and you think, okay, like Nerdalliun was pointing out, oh, that resonates with me. I admire that. I want to be like that. Or I even subconsciously start to become more like that without even, consciously putting an effort into it. All of that is the way that narrative allows us to to approach a virtue ethics character based way of understanding our place in the world and developing ethically.
Can I just give you all a compliment, because you have all done that for me. So thank you very much, guys.
That's why we're here. I don't know if we've done it, but we all are meeting with each other for the purpose of being challenged by other characters that we respect.
You're conduits for this information, for sure. You know, channels, or you direct them. I just know that, like, when I met Rogério, my life got better. So this is definitely something I'm into. So, and you too, Nerdalliun, and Graham, and Zara. But,
nice to meet you today.
Yeah, nice to meet you, buddy.
That's why we're here. The feeling is mutual, is all I mean to say. That's why we're here. We're trying to get together with people who can challenge us and encourage us on this path. So I agree.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the choice of Vishnu, and for the choice, Vishnu and the God as the servant to the main character. I think that's part of the play. I think the whole role model aspect here is you're supposed to grow into and be your own role model, because part of the lesson that's getting taught there is the man in the arena versus the man in the audience, and the man above looking down in the arena. And that's the lesson that's trying to be taught there, that Arjuna needs to learn, is you need to be both the man above and the man in the arena. And sometimes you just have to set everything aside and just do your duty in the arena, sort of thing. And that's sort of what I'm seeing happening here and all of that, tagging on that.
Possibly the idea is that, we're always destined to walk our own path, but people can arm us with the wisdom that makes that path easier and that journey easier to walk, when we're alone sometimes in life. Sorry, I got a little bit melancholy there.
I would say that without experiencing some adversity in life, the adversity by itself gives us lessons, but not so much if we just kind of go through life on autopilot. More if we examine what's going on with ourselves and with the adversity. Even more so if we intentionally try to get at the most wise pieces of literature and wise individuals who ever lived, and try to pry wisdom out of them by, as we've mentioned, wrestle with their ideas. Here I'm using an expression that I got from Zara, clearly, of course, so as a homage to this guy. And we are not here in the right, or kind of deluded that we are in the right, and we should not be, because these are so complex ideas that probably they are larger than individual human beings and human minds. But even if we just improve just partially in them, it will be really worthwhile. Go ahead, Wolfy.
I just think the thing is that you guys are willing to take the inventory to figure it out and question yourselves, as well as question these texts and figure it all out, and taking the time to sit back and contemplate and introspect is admirable, so yeah.
Thanks, Wolfy. So let's do some more of that then, shall we?
Yeah. Okay. Besides this, I also brought Krishna saying you must follow your true path, your Svadharma, the Dharma uniquely appropriated to you. So takes precedence over the other forms. And then here I have a few quotes. It is far better to perform one's natural prescribed duty, though tinged with faults, than to perform another's prescribed duty, though perfectly. In fact, it is preferable to die in the discharge of one's duty than to follow the path of another, which is fraught with danger. Then he goes, they say that life is an accident driven by sexual desire, that the universe has no moral order, no truth, no God. Driven by insatiable lusts, drunk on the arrogance of power, hypocritical, deluded, their actions foul with self-seeking, tormented by a vast anxiety that continues until their death, convinced that the gratification of desire is life's sole aim, bound by 100 shekels of hope, enslaved by their greed, they squander their time dishonestly, piling up mountains of wealth. Today I got this desire, and tomorrow I will get that one. All these riches are mine, and soon I will have even more. Already I have killed these enemies, and soon I will kill the rest. I am the Lord, the enjoyer, successful, happy and strong, noble and rich and famous. Who on earth is my equal? So these are the quotes that I brought here, and also toward what should interior insights be directed was a question in the podcast. Krishna, think of me. I am the origin of this entire universe and its dissolution. All this is strung on me as strands of pearls are strung on a string. So it kind of also brings in the other facets of the Trimurti here, the creation and destruction. So justifies action in terms of a devotional theism. Also rituals of sacrifice to the top god to propitiate him are also mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. So having said this, feel free, guys, to comment or ask me to go back to comment any slide.
That's astonishing.
Yeah, the inspiration of these monks or Brahmins or whatnot to write this is something extraordinary.
It reminds me a little bit of the response of God to Job when Job got him in a bit of a corner, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but sort of blaming God for, I think, lying. But Graham, maybe you can remember the story a little bit better. And God also goes off on like who are you to question me? Like, have you created the storms or whatever? And he gives us a similar speech. But yeah, this speech is great. Something I've been a little curious about. So I'm not too sure what to make with this passage. I'm just kind of thinking out loud. Like lots of quite famous Western thinkers have found inspiration in the Bhagavad Gita, and part of me thinks that some of the value of being of wrestling with and coming in contact with something that's sort of this poetic and devotional and grand and epic from another culture who basically knows nothing of your own culture's Jesus or the God of the Bible or whatever. I can imagine that being like a source of solace, like all those heathens, according to most Christians, like have something that's admirable, like at least to a similar level to some of the more inspired aspects of Christianity. And I can imagine for a lot of these individuals who found inspiration in the Bhagavad Gita, they at some point lost their faith in Christianity. And it's like within the frame of Christianity, often if you lose faith, you become one of those hopeless heathens that'll definitely go to hell, and there's nothing good about you. So like renouncing your faith makes you one of the contemptible devils. And it's nice to find among the contemptible devils something really admirable and maybe even seem like it was inspired by something divine in a way that might be hopeful and comforting and give some solace that like, all right, if I may be one of the devils, but like some of these devils seem to have some kind of relationship to something that may be divine as well. So maybe there's hope for me too. Like I said, I'm speculating, but like Pat, like the quote you gave makes it clear to me that like maybe that kind of thing might have happened for some of these really famous Western intellectuals who found comfort in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, it's a hell of an accomplishment. This perspective of Krishna saying he's the whole, the creation and the destruction. I'm a little overwhelmed. It's pretty impressive.
That's probably the same reaction as Arjuna felt. That at least as they clearly portray him as being overwhelmed, even to tears. And the Gita is quite long, quite expensive, full of these kinds of life advice that is quite poetic and profound, quite well written. quite eloquent. And yeah, as you were saying, Nerdalliun, if we are born inside a tradition and we absorb the better parts of the tradition's myth and poetry and whatnot, and we kind of think ourselves, yeah, we have something going for us, and this is really awesome. Poor people who have born outside of my tradition, they have nothing going for them. But then if you chance upon kind of voyaging through different traditions, like we are attempting to do, and we suddenly figure out, well, these Hindu guys really did have something going for them that gave them inspiration, hope, some moral guidance and whatnot, even just from a chapter of their epic myth. Aldous Huxley was for one a guy who really loved this. He really loved to compare the Bhagavad Gita with Taoist texts, with texts from John of the Cross, William James. So compare, and also Rumi. So a comparison between West, Middle East, East, Southern East, and Far East, and he found similar traits in these different traditions, essential qualities, which, to borrow the word from Aristotle and the concept, by looking at different traditions, we might have a hint of what is really essential in religious and philosophical traditions. And yeah, this makes the perennial philosophy a really fun read and interesting book to study. It's basically maybe 40% quoting, direct quotes from Bhagavad Gita, Lao Tzu, William James, John of the Cross, etc., and some commentary from him, basically.
Is there a good popular art depiction of this story? Not the Bhagavad, the giant, the great tale of the dynasty. I don't remember the right way of saying it, but
you mean like cinematic representation or
something like that,
TV
yeah,
series or something like that?
Anything that's infected the West, yeah.
I have several different comic book adaptations of the Mahabharata that I picked up over the years. So those do exist. I know that, Tag.
Awesome.
Yeah, it'll definitely need a series.
Yeah.
I even think 3 Lord of the Ring length movies wouldn't be enough.
Yes.
Right. You need a 10-year BBC special. I'm wondering if there's been one.
I'd be shocked if Bollywood hadn't done something.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm certain they have.
Bollywood probably did, but probably they will have some kind of inside in jokes that are understandable for India right now that will probably alienate us. So yeah,
it's okay. I'll be a stranger. Sometimes you have to just go and say, I'm not getting 80% of this, but there's something really valuable. So I'll just be the outsider who's trying to get what he can out of it. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but yeah, I think that there's no way it hasn't been done in Bollywood. So maybe that's where I should go looking.
There's an 88 TV series. There's a 2013 TV series. And that's so there are a few things
okay, I'll look it up.
Rapid Google search, and there's a chance, at least from previous searches that I've done, that most of it is on YouTube, freely available with English subtitles, if not English dubbing or something like that. So yeah, there's that. I know for sure about the Ramayana, which precedes this one. There's a really fine quality Japanese animation that was done in conjunction with between India and Japan, a really nice cooperation that resulted in a really interesting film that's short of 3 hours long, and covers the main plot points of the Ramayana. But as far as I know, nothing of this the equivalence has been done for the Mahabharata, but I might be wrong.
I just realized that we're not making use of our greatest resource, which is Indian Twitter. So we've got all our Hindu friends in spaces over there. We should just go ask them after this. And
Of course.
We'll find the answer.
Yeah, and these excerpts that I read are merely a sampling. Of course, I couldn't bring the entire thing here. Otherwise, we would not stop between several hours.
Well, we're going to do that in our epics course. But we should. We're definitely
these texts definitely deserve us to live them. Basically, us to read them with others and wrestle with their significance, and instead of just reading them passively and not without kind of feeling them intensely. These texts surely deserve that, because they're philosophically rich, especially ethics wise, and they also talk about a lot of fundamental aspects of human nature, character development.
All right,
then I be calling it quits.
I see Prashant has indicated there are several TV series in the comments. We can show it.
Awesome. Yeah, exactly. There's the 88 one that appeared on Google. Yeah, and of course they will probably be adaptations that are kind of abridged. They probably cut off some extraneous or smaller stories or whatnot that fill in the unabridged volumes.
Perhaps I should watch some of these.
One way that I managed to digest part of the Ramayana, the Ramayana in unabridged in audiobook, was throughout an entire month, listening to 1 to 2 hours every single day. So I managed to go through that.
Yeah, I remember you telling me.
Yeah. And the Mahabharata probably would take more than 2 months. I also have that. I only listened to the main kind of first 5 chapters and the Bhagavad Gita, which is the 25th chapter, if I'm not mistaken. I have a few more slides about the Bhagavad Gita, 3. So,
please,
to complement, Krishna promises that even women and the lowborn Sudras can be liberated through sincere devotion to him, kind of paralleling Buddhism and also Jainism, if I'm not mistaken. That also they say that Buddha also mentioned that also women have the path to liberation or nirvana open to them. Then we must at all times act thinking of a higher ideal, conceptualized as thinking about Krishna as a mouthpiece and role model, so as to follow Krishna's example of upholding cosmic harmony. So maybe not per se the actual Krishna, literary Krishna. Maybe if it resonates with you, go for it, but not necessarily. It will maybe not necessarily resonate with every single human being. But I think the gist of this, the fundamental, essential part of this is us figuring out what constitutes cosmic harmony, what constitutes the alignment with cosmos, and follow that. And then Krishna. So to give another tidbit here before we close the Bhagavad Gita, this was also in part intended for a royal audience, at least some of the lessons. So this is royal wisdom or knowledge of the kings, Raja Vidya. the king is a uniquely appropriate position to model the divine through his actions, just as you guys mentioned. So if the king furthers this kind of imitation game of showing himself through to his subjects as doing deeds that are praiseworthy, it raises the chances that his subjects will take his example.
Yeah, and I'd like to make a point on that, and it'll maybe be a nice segue into our section on non-violence. There's the Buddhists were really appalled by the Vedic tradition of animal sacrifice, and I've been looking a little bit at the history of decision making, and specifically in Sumerian rituals, there would be a ceremony after a harvest for collecting sort of community stores of food that would then be used to pay specialists or keep specialists alive that support the community in ways other than farming, and also store for times when the farm harvest won't come in. So there'd be some time in between harvests, and the reserves have to be managed in an appropriate way. Otherwise, food runs out, and for a stationary society, that may be a problem if your food runs out and you have nowhere to go for more food. But anyway, so there are depictions of ceremonies much older than this. So going back maybe 5,000 years or so, like between 5,000 and 6,000 years, so a lot older. And what would happen is you'd have relatively lower rank individuals carrying baskets of grains to the sort of town stores as their offers, and it was expected that the town chiefs or the city chiefs would also have to make sacrifices, but they would sacrifice animals. Being more wealthy, they would own animals, and so their offering would be the animals. And so I think probably there's something similar going on here in India. There are signs of trade between India and Mesopotamia going back perhaps 7,000 BCE, so 9,000 years ago. So there's definitely some communication in them. And I think it looks like this this practice of animal sacrifice originated with the kings also having to sacrifice, and them being more wealthy, they would sacrifice more valuable items. So animals being much more valuable and much rarer and much more expensive. And I think there's something to requiring kings to also make sacrifice in exactly this role model sense, in that like have a very public display that the king is willing to part with something of value to himself for the sake of the community, hoping to model that behavior to the rest of the community so that they would also part of things that are of value to them for the sake of the community. So it's not just a tax that flows up, but that the king also pays his tax, and that like part of the reason why the lower ranks should pay their tax is because even the king is willing to pay the tax. It's not for the king, it's not for the commoners, it's for the sake of the community. And I think that kind of role modeling of willingness of leadership to make sacrifices is really important. Otherwise, it's easy to end up with leaders who abuse the leadership position for their own benefit and who are unwilling to make sacrifices for the community and are very willing to make sacrifices on part of the community for their own personal gain. And if the leadership starts doing that in a way that's visible to the masses can be expected to follow suit, and you'll have a society fall apart very quickly if people start going or making expenses on behalf of society for their own selfish gain and foregoing making selfless sacrifices for the sake of the society. That's a recipe for having a society collapse really quickly. So having some kind of institution where there's this really visible ritual, like a ceremony, where it's very obvious, like what's happening here is the leadership are making expensive sacrifices either to the gods or for the sake of the community. I think like if it was clearly for the sake of the community, that might be even better than sacrificing for the gods. But at least I guess if you're in a story where we need to sacrifice to the gods for the sake of the community, like we need to keep the gods happy, otherwise the community will suffer, then that can work. But I look at our societies and it's not clear like exactly what leaders are sacrificing for the sake specifically of the societies that they're leading. Like they have very demanding jobs and whatever, so they work long hours. But I mean, many people are working long hours. It's not unique to leadership. And yeah, I think having a more public display of sacrifice on the part of the leaders would probably do society some good. Even if it isn't specifically animal sacrifice, that might be the best thing.
A bit more ceremonial practice of paying taxes or whatnot.
Yeah, but doing it in a visible way.
Yeah. Well, there's some of that, but not in regards of paying taxes. In regards of paying taxes, I think the influence is backwards. People talk about the richest and how they sneakily and underhandedly avoid paying taxes. But the celebrities and richest elite of the world, they're constantly kind of virtue signaling that they are paying to foundations and philanthropic causes and whatnot. So maybe that's kind of by nature the equivalent of this phenomena from antiquity that you were describing, Nerdalliun.
Yeah, I think it's the Mahabharata, the original story we're talking about, is that totalitarianism versus visionary leadership that sacrifices for the greater good and has an aim. Yeah, that's a heck of a thing. I also think that totalitarianism, I think the fish rots from the tail, even though people say the fish rots from the head, right? So the corrupt leader is in charge and he corrupts the citizens if they put up with it is one way of thinking about it. But I also think that there's a grassroots demand for totalitarianism that comes from the slavish desire to be told what to do so that you don't have to work it out for yourself. And that sometimes the society becomes corrupt and then they get the leaders that they deserve. They get the totalitarianism. It's this idea that if you won't govern yourself, someone else is going to govern you, right? If you're not able to control yourself, well, you can expect an increased police force, that kind of thing. And it moves in the direction of totalitarianism.
But you also have examples like Frederick Douglass and Epictetus, who started as slaves, really as the downtrodden of their respective societies, and they proved their excellence and merit, and freed themselves out of bondage, physical bondage, and also probably psychological bondage, all the same, and rather became exemplars of moral character and moral action. And in the case of Epictetus, he taught many students and indirectly taught Marcus Aurelius, while Frederick Douglass ushered in the abolition. He commanded it was a leader of the abolitionist movement in the 1900s or the 1800s, end of the 1800s of the United States. And after he managed to legally help abolish slavery, he then turned to women's rights to usher in some equality in terms of quality of life for women as well. So yeah, these are examples where instead of the fish rotting from the tail, the fish can redeem itself from the tail. And
absolutely,
in parts,
100%. So
in part, that's also what we're trying here to do. We're trying to serve ourselves in terms of improve our own selves, firstly, to be kind with ourselves and do some self-therapy to ourselves with
That's
this
right.
kind of material. And afterwards, after enough time, maybe this will overflow.
Because it can rot from the tail. That's exactly correct. What we should say is, okay, where am I screwing up? Let me turn around, and who knows how much good that can do in the world. I agree completely for exactly that reason. Every individual's corruption and their desire to participate in lies and to live in a world where totalitarianism is, of course, going to emerge, pushes us in that direction. That's great news, because all we have to do as individuals is turn the other direction and who knows what can happen from that. So yeah, I absolutely agree, 100%.
Probably shouldn't be like a plea to the authority figures, please save me from myself. It should be like, I'm going to save myself. Yeah.
That's the slave mentality. The slave wants food, clothing, housing, and occasional medical care given to them by those who will guarantee that they live a good life. That's a slave mentality, and I have nothing but contempt for it anymore. Go to hell if that's what you want. Grow up and take responsibility and move things yourself like you're a master rather than a slave, or don't talk to me. The reason we're going the wrong direction is there's too many people who want that. And then they get exactly what they deserve. They get suffering, misery, beggary, bankruptcy. The only people with guns are thugs and criminals. You get exactly what you deserve if you want someone else to take responsibility for your life. You contemptible slaves. I'm done. I'm not going to go into a bigger speech. I'm done. But you get what you deserve.
Yeah. So, sort of not hiding contempt is one thing, but indulging contempt is something else. So.
I think we need a little bit more of it. I think the voice, I'm going to infuse a little bit of it in here on this topic. I think that the public conversation could use a remembrance that you're supposed to look down on slaves and not say, oh, what is the slave telling me to do so I don't hurt his feelings anymore? There's too much of a totalitarianism of weakness that's causing us to say, oh, I wouldn't want to say anything that upsets the slaves and the weak. And it's like, no, grow up, be strong. You're stronger than you're pretending to be. And you're going to suffer and everybody else is going to suffer if you keep getting your way. So it's about time we start turning our backs on people who talk that way. And so if you'll forgive me, I'm going to try to indulge in it just a little bit more in the near future, because I think it's needed.
Let's see how your approach fares. I, for one, am compassionate towards others in general, even though I don't try to overextend my reach to suffer inside other people's suffering. I try not to be dragged down with the person drowning. Rather, I try to employ best practices of getting out of the water together, basically, in a sense. But I think you have a worthy point, which is this kind of concept of slavery. It's really not about physical slavery of people actually having chains. Yeah, it's about metaphysics, and metaphysics is something that is elusive to most of the people. It was elusive to me until last years old, basically, when I got a huge lesson on metaphysics by my friend from the Philippines, Victor Meneses Sarcia, which I'm deeply grateful for. I did a conversation in podcast with him, and he really enlightened me regarding this. And so if metaphysics is kind of like a realm in which we can be a gardener, and it's like very subject to change, and we are almost like a god in this realm. We can change our own inner metaphysics by will. We just need to have some intention to do that, to take the reins of our own inner self-development and become the gardener of our mind. And so we can refashion our metaphysics to, instead of being a metaphysics that is propitiating subserviency, it will propitiate agency and the seeking of uplifting others also, not just our own. This is my stance on it. Yeah, but I agree with you. There are people that are wretches in the form of how the ancients would say.
We're not expressing contempt for people who are in a bad situation. Epictetus didn't act like a slave. We're not having contempt for people who are in a bad situation. What we're saying is it's not compassionate to encourage people to feel good about putting cement shoes on and jumping in the ocean. If you want to stop them from drowning, you have to start speaking the truth, whether or not they cry over hearing it, and say, no, stop doing that, or don't expect me to respect you. I think we're saying the same thing, and I think I agree with you completely.
To exploit your visual, you would even need to cut their legs to save them if they have cement shoes.
I'm going to turn my back. I'm drown if you want to. I'm not going with you.
And that will hurt a lot. And one thing that I've experienced, and probably other people will experience, is when you start to pick up the reins of your own path, your own life path, you will suffer quite a bit. It will be adverse because you're not used to it, and you're not used to being the recipient, the immediate recipient of your blunders. But you will also figure out that if you get a little bit of mastery, you will also get the rewards also immediately. But it takes patience.
How hard is it to start pushing a train car to get it moving? It's really hard. But once you get it moving, it's just as hard to stop it. So, yeah.
So I'd like to do two things. The one thing is just maybe balance this out. There are some people who seek help who already, number one, are riddled with self-contempt and self-hatred and really not able to help themselves, really in need of other people helping them. I'm thinking of the population of people for which dialectical behavior therapy was developed. And I'm sort of thinking in my mind some of the stuff I've been reading about that, where Marshall Linehan basically explains that like these are people who, if you listen to them talk about themselves, it's just full of self-contempt and it's pejorative and talking themselves down and how useless they are. So at least some people are suffering and desiring for like people over them to take the reins, because they have like this massive amount of self-contempt and sort of laying it on and taking it on, not necessarily helpful. So I think
I don't know how I've communicated so badly. Obviously, my aim is to encourage those people and to say that you could stop wanting to be weak and you could be stronger than you're pretending to be. I'm obviously, the aim is to empower those people.
But be wary, Zara, not to alienate them or to frighten them, because they are not courageous overall. They lack some of the attributes that are conducive to resilience mentality, and so they will be spooked probably very easily.
My guess is that there's an 80% likelihood that my experiment will turn out badly, and you two are both correct. But I'm going to run it, and I'll give you the report on how it works out, because that's what I'm going to do. But I suspect you're correct. There's probably some foolishness in this design.
The second thing I wanted to do was just to highlight some comments by Mark. First of all, he said, I wanted to do this one. He said, contempt is violence, and non-violence towards all beings is the highest dharma, except when violence upholds dharma. And so I think maybe it's time to carry on to our talk about non-violence. So
let's go. Let's go. This will be short, I promise you guys. Hopefully it will spring some nice discussion. So the ethics of harmlessness, ahimsa, also known as non-violence, non-injury. I got the feedback from a philosophy professor who was from the Vedic tradition and then converted to Christianity. She says that the best translation of ahimsa is actually harmlessness and not so much non-violence. So I included all these. And so ethics of harmlessness. So one of the points is, so there's the ethics of killing animals for food, which is considered quite normal for maybe 99.9 or something % of humanity. In the West, up to modernity, mostly ignored, except for some groups that we have also approached, some of them, Pythagoreans. Then there's the Cynic Stoics, there's Plutarch and Porphyry, Porphyry actually wrote a treatise on defending not eating animals. While in India, non-violence, including killing animals for food, was a key theme in religious and philosophical culture, especially Buddhists, but doubly especially in Jains, and I think you'll realize why. So there are two texts that were mentioned by Peter Adamson and Ganeri, mention exhorting nonviolence, the laws of Manu, Mahabharata in some parts, most of the Mahabharata actually, but not Bhagavad Gita for obvious reasons. It mirrors quite nicely Mark's commentary. If Dharma is supporting continuous, let me see the words. So non-violence toward all beings is the highest dharma, except when violence upholds dharma. So if violence is not if non-violence is not upholding dharma, then some violence is needed to restore the balance. Basically, that's what I'm saying. A bit like how trying to delay the war that is really, for all accounts, inevitable, will even result in further more damage. Probably more allies will join, or something like that. More weaponry will be amassed, and when the war blows out, it will be even more destructive, even more difficult to recover from. And so if we have in our lives some terrible thing that we must do, some duty, something that we are bound by a contract to do, and it's terrible, we might as well get on with it and resolve it, maybe the first thing even, so that we will have that thing behind us before going to other things. Then to go more forward with this ethic of harmlessness. So Vedic tradition involves regular ritualistic animal sacrifice, perhaps resulting in anxiety or embarrassment within the tradition, probably after some centuries of this, because of the critiques from the Buddhists and the Jains. And there's also the thing of the whole caste with the duty to conduct warfare, the Kshatriyas, which contrasted extremely with the Jainas, who believe that one can inflict himsa even on plants and even commit acts of violence by lighting a fire, which burns invisible life forms that are fluttering in the air, or drinking water straight from a well. And they even knew that water in nature has beings there, so without microscopes. And so the question that was posed in the podcast was his ahimsa pursued for moral or religious reasons, or both? Is the concern related to karmic or divine retribution? So maybe a bit more selfishly motivated. In the laws of Manu, to quote from them, it says, "We can't eat meat without injuring the living. And doing this hinders us from blessed afterlife. So we have to do without meat." Before going into the Buddhist golden rule regarding this, I would also like to mention that there's this concept in Jainism in which it is more severe. The more severe offenses are related to killing beings with more senses. So kind of flatworms and worms and whatnot, who only have two senses, touch and taste, or something like that, is less severe than killing animals, four-legged animals, or human beings who have more senses. And so there's a criterion, doctrinal criterion there, that is more or less related to the ability to suffer pain, which mirrors a bit some of the utilitarian ethics related to that's end in veganism and vegetarianism nowadays. So yeah, if you guys would like to discuss, feel free.
Yeah, so far, I don't have too much to say. I have a lot of opinions about making harm the only consideration for morality. I think like we have all kinds of values that can be sort of in conflict with the desire not to do harm, and to say harm is at the end of the day the only thing that matters is a big move. And I instinctively sort of resist people trying to reduce ethics to one or a few principles. I think life is rich and complicated, and we have lots of values and lots of values to uphold that include things not just harm. So I'll just a very mundane, maybe not a super serious ethical one, is the example of punching someone in the face. That's clearly harmful. It's causing them pain and affliction. And it was in a context where we were practicing martial arts and also having fun. And like just this morning, I wrestled, and like it hurts. Like it genuinely like pains and hurts. And sometimes by accident, we cause injuries that prevent us from training for a little while, and every now and then someone is unlucky enough to have very serious injuries that prevent them from playing the sport at all. And we're willing to risk that harm because the sport in and of itself is rewarding enough. We're learning all kinds of things. We're learning how to move our bodies. We're making friends. We're having fun. And, I could go on and on about like why martial arts is a fun thing to practice. And we are harming each other all the time. It's a small harm. So the harm is small. The benefits are big. And so everybody is just on board with it. Like, yeah, like you want to work chokes today? Yeah, let's work chokes today. Working chokes really fucking hurt. Like it's not pleasant. It's not pleasant, but we're all into it. And there's something there. There's consent. So when it comes to killing animals, most animals won't consent. But then I think sometimes if they could consent, they would. Like I think animals can suffer a lot as well. And I know it's a very tricky subject, but I think sometimes people are in situations where they really would consent if you wanted to kill them. Like euthanasia is a thing. It's considered it's illegal in many places, and a lot of people think it's morally abhorrent because it violates a divine command, or it violates this or the other. But I think some people, you would do them a favor by killing them, and I think some animals you would do a favor by killing them. Even though you could say harming something is never a favor, but the point I'm trying to make is I think what's like goods and harms are really rich and multidimensional, and I don't like trying to reduce it all to just never do harm. Even in medicine, when people say above all else, never do harm, like there isn't really a medical practitioner who really follows that. We would never have anything like chemotherapy or surgery or like lots of medical interventions if we said the first and only priority is to not do harm. It's really just among the considerations. And yeah, that's, I guess, my little rant about harmlessness. As to the material and the quotes stuff, I'm too new to it to really add much to like who said what among the Indians relating to this this teaching of harmlessness. I kind of just have my own little 2 cents about harming or the philosophy of harm.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that one with the idea that it seems like they had learned the lesson that never lying and always telling the truth, that unilateral one-size-fits-all approach was wrong back in the Bhagavad Gita, but now they've lost the idea that that could possibly apply to violence, that sometimes perhaps violence is the right call in a situation. And it's just, I find it intriguing that it's like we just examined where they learned the one lesson, and then they hear they still haven't learned it in this other area. Just going to tag on that.
Yeah. So I'll read the excerpt from the Buddhist text. And so it says, "Since I want to live, it would not be agreeable and pleasant to me if somebody were to take my life. For another person, too, it would be disagreeable and unpleasant if I were to take his life, since he wants to live. Precisely that which is disagreeable and unpleasant to me is disagreeable and unpleasant also to the other. How then could I inflict upon the other that which I find disagreeable and unpleasant to myself?" So yeah, of course, there's this edge case that you mentioned, Nerdalliun, of euthanasia, where people are in excruciating pain due to a terminal illness, and the euthanasia will really be kind of reducing the period of time in which they are still alive and enduring mostly pain. So there is a lot of ethical discussion regarding euthanasia in many countries, with legal ramifications regarding lawmaking. But for the most part, people, if they don't have anything extremely wrong with them, they will want to live. And we kind of, by inference, infer that to animals as well. But of course, there is the thing where a hunter is trying to hunt a deer, and if the deer slips and falls and suffers agonizing pain, the duty of the hunter is to end this deer's life as quickly as possible. At least hunters that I know about have this precept in mind.
Yeah, and there's something to sort of population management as well. If the population of predators gets too large and it threatens the population of the prey animals, like sometimes it's necessary for wildlife preservers to either move those predators, or if there's no way to move them, to cull them, which basically means killing a large number of them, and that would be for the good of the ecosystem, harming the predators. It can also happen that a population of herding animals can become too big and threaten to deplete or also threaten the ecosystem. So sometimes there's a larger system that benefits from the sacrifice of a part, and it's that similar. If you want to do a trick that in the Vedas is suggested, to make an analogy with the individual body, sometimes people amputate parts of the body to save the rest of the body if there's really bad gangrene or something in it, or if there's a threat that the part being amputated will cause the person to perish. Sometimes amputation is a thing. And in organizations, or if you have in ecologies, sometimes part of the ecology needs to be sacrificed for the whole. And yeah, those decisions are usually rough. It's like really when it comes to people, like deciding who are the people that we're going to sacrifice becomes just fraught with ethical difficulties, and it's part of the decision that was faced by Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, or like wartime. There are often these kinds of decisions. I guess generals have different strategies, and those different strategies have different kinds of risks for different subpopulations. And it boils down to like, and even non-action could be putting the most people at the most risk. And so like you have to kind of make some kind of warlike decision. And that is going to necessarily involve sacrificing some people. And yeah, I think avoiding all sacrifice is just practically impossible. And it's interesting in this chapter with the history of the Jainas, just how far the Jainas went to try to avoid any and all harm, and how at the end, like really, they can get quite close to doing no harm, but they're mostly doing harm to themselves. And to a certain degree, they're outsourcing some of the harm that has to be done to others. And I think that at the end of the day is going to be unavoidable. Like to live, I think unavoidably puts us in conflicts of interest with other living beings, and someone's interest is going to be harmed in some way. And maybe it's noble to attempt to reduce harm to nothing. I don't think so. I think that sacrifices a lot of other things. Like those Jainas are then sacrificing, especially if it's a really intelligent person. That person may have become a medical researcher and made real advances that would have improved the health and well-being of many people for many generations after them by doing morally questionable research on animals, for example. Like it's really tragic for the animals being sacrificed in that research, but there are benefits on the other hand. And when you say like we won't harm the animals, you're foregoing benefits, and like foregoing benefits and causing harm are not so easily distinguishable to just say like, well, benefits, like it's, I know people actually argue this. They say foregoing benefit is less severe, or it counts for less than preventing harm. So preventing harm is a higher priority than foregoing benefit. And even so, sometimes you could say, well, the benefits are really of such a nature that like this massive benefits are being foregone for the sake of preventing a small amount of harm. That would be, I think, unethical. And like some people take it completely out of kilter, where they'll be willing to basically sacrifice forego all benefits for the sake of trying to prevent all harms. And I think that just leads to a nonsensical life that doesn't really make sense and is way too harsh on the person who tries to do it. Yeah.
I would like to throw a certain, actual ethical case that's been a problem for the medical community for about 100 years, and that's what to do with the Nazi medical research on human experiments. Because you're not even talking about doing future harm, you're talking about taking advantage of the research of harm that's already been done and trying to get benefit off of the harm that's already been done. But the medical community came to the decision that even the idea of doing that's too horrific, that research is just verboten. You cannot use that whatsoever for anything. And just, I don't know if you agree with the medical community decision on that one or not. I pretty much do. I don't think they could have done any other way. Tag.
That's another moral conundrum. It seems that people are queasy about the origin of where it came from. Like someone did the sacrifice without asking us permission for us, in a sense. A bit like how Jesus Christ sacrificed himself, as the Christians say, and so we have no say in that, and they say that the sacrifice was for everyone. But it was maliciously done by the Nazis because they considered these test subjects subhuman or not even human or whatnot. But the research, if it were used on the other hand, would potentially save lives today and in the future. It's a bit like someone hands you a nice t-shirt and you love it, you love the design, and then someone says, well, this t-shirt was used by a serial killer, he killed 10 people, and now maybe you're looking at the t-shirt with the idea of never wearing it.
Yeah, I don't know that I would be willing to or able to resolve that in a way that makes sense. I've no idea the nature of the experiments that were done and the quality of data.
Yeah.
I have a suspicion that it was more or less an instinctual move, and the quality of experiments and quality of data weren't given much consideration just out of moral outrage. But it's also possible that if it was given consideration, it would be found that the benefits would be marginal. Like medical research can be very difficult to do well, and like data can be problematic in all kinds of ways. So it may be that giving that up doesn't really impact medical practice all that much, or it could be that like a lot of people, like many more people than were tortured and killed in these experiments, ended up suffering because people wouldn't look at data that was available. So I think it would be tragic and maybe ethical failure if the experiments were very informative and could have led to improved healthcare in a way that would benefit lots of people for a long time after the experiments. To then just throw that out because they were unethical seems like a waste. But doing that calculation of would enough people benefit enough to make it worth it seems like very problematic. And even doing those sorts of trade-offs, as some people consider thinking in terms of trade-offs taboo at all. Like there are people who say there are some questions about which it's completely perverse to think in sort of quantitative economic terms of weighing benefits and pros and cons like that. Like some things are just off the table, and no matter how much the benefit is, like you can never make those trade-offs. I'm not sure I completely buy that, but some people feel that way. So even me just speaking in terms of maybe the benefits wouldn't really outweigh the harm of or sort of the offensiveness of using this unethically sourced data. Yeah, I think I made that point clear enough. Just sort of saying that I don't know where I would land because I don't know enough details, and I know that like some people would object to even the analytical frame that I'm subjecting this question to. So yeah,
I have a
these are tricky
question.
waters.
I have a question regarding this scenario. Could it be that what is also weighing in on this decision, supposing that the data is good quality and could help substantially advance medicine, that the people are also weighing that if they really do pick up this data and work with it, they will be then on labeled as the people, the scientists who are working with the Nazi data, and they don't want to have that kind of social score so to speak.
That's one aspect. Another major aspect is the idea of giving support and credence and giving any legitimacy to a Nazi effort. To sit there and say that they actually did experiments well and they could produce, data of value is anathema to some people as well, like Nerdalliun was talking about. Tag.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, apparently the philosophers feel differently to the doctors, because there are lots of philosophers who have lots of time for like Nazis like Heidegger.
Yeah,
No problem with him, like Nazi scum, but he had interesting philosophical thoughts, so let's talk about those. I don't even think his philosophy is all that interesting, to be honest. But yeah, so that's just an observation.
There's a bit more here, going more in directly into Jainism and Mahavira. So while people outside of Jainism might consider Mahavira the founder of Jainism, for the people inside the tradition, they consider him the last in line of 24 Tatinkars or Ford makers. So Ford makers is in this visual metaphor of crossing from one margin, one riverbank to another, signifying liberation, basically. So Jains were very concerned with karma. So maybe the philosophical group in India most concerned with karma, perhaps. So they would say that even good karma ties you to rebirth, and since they associated rebirth with suffering and not good, some attributes that are undesirable, similar to the Buddhists. And they say that rebirth occurs when the soul, that they call jiva, enters into a relation with the physical world, ajiva, in particular a series of individual bodies. So karma is compared to sticky dust, which gets stuck to the jiva more easily when we give in to passion, kasaya, or bad intention. In trying to avoid acquiring new karma, these renouncers that are really into the full code of the Jains, they undergo salekana, total immobility, until death comes from thirst, exposure, and hunger. Peter Adamson mentioned that they would train for years to the moment of starting the practice of salekana, which, as you've described, Nerdalliun, this is really the apex of Jaina self-harm, basically. In this pursuit of not harming others, they really are harming a part of the universe. Perhaps their doctrine is emphasizing the maximization of harm reduction. And there is a point of harm reduction where you will not have any gains. You will have self-harm, for instance, coming out of the attempts, or you will simply just have lower gains, such marginal gains of reduction of harm, that probably the gains won't even be justified in a utilitarian sense. And there's even this story, this Jaina forest fire story that Peter Adamson mentions. So one day a forest fire erupted in a wood, and all the animals gathered around a lake to avoid the flames. They were packed together tightly, rubbing shoulder to shoulder in the limited space. An elephant lifted his foot briefly to shift his position, probably. And just then a rabbit darted to the spot on which it had been standing. Rather than putting its foot down and crushing the rabbit, the elephant stood there with his foot held aloft for 3 days, before finally collapsing and dying from fatigue. The happy end to the tale is that the elephant is reborn as a human and later reincarnated as an associate of Mahavira himself. So, a tale that serves the agenda and the most notables of Jainism, to be sure. Another moment to say, cool story, bro.
That story is ridiculous. How many animals did the elephant kill when it fell over, when it died?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's so maybe after the 3 days the fire was stopping or something like that, but they didn't explain this part, at least in the podcast episode. Also, the giants reinforce one thing, which is when you voluntarily do an action that results in harm, it will produce karma. But since the elephant involuntarily died, this harm that was produced by the elephant collapsing, according to the giant doctrine, is not conducive to karma at all. So yeah, this is the story. The giants divide into 2 groups. So not 40,000 like the Christians, not 30 plus like the Buddhists, but 2. So the Digambaras or Skyclads, who basically are practicing their asceticism without any clothes, and the Svetambaras, who are white-clad. And both of them, as you can see in the photos, have to their side a brush. When they walk, they brush in front of them to remove any unnoticed little critters so that they don't step on them. And the guy of the Svetambara wears a mask so that he doesn't intake involuntarily while walking around small critters that might unwittingly end up in his mouth. So there's that. While riding my bicycle, sometimes a bug enters my eyes, and I kill the bug just by blinking to remove the bug. So maybe they should also wear protective glasses if they travel faster than walking speed. And yeah, this is pretty much what I have from the giants. It's a really unique doctrine that they have. And although probably this is not for everyone, probably not for a huge portion of the population, perhaps there is something that we can learn from the Jainist ethics, which is we can always look at the study of such a tradition like this to question ourselves if there is something that we could do in our daily lives that would cost us next to nothing, that would result in less harm in a way that is substantially higher than the mere inconvenience of us changing something. On my part, I'm a vegetarian and I'm not a vegan per se like my girlfriend is, but I try to reduce the use of animal products as much as I can, as practically possible. So I'm not a giant, but I have a bit of their precepts, I should say. Okay, guys, feel free to add any comments or ask any questions, or disagree or feel triggered by the giant.
I feel triggered. This seems completely ridiculous to me.
Yeah, you rightly pointed out when the elephant collapses, assuming that they're still all there because he's still lifting his leg by necessity, he will collapse either onto the lake or to the other animals or something like that.
Ends up killing the animal that was standing on one leg to save. It was just a delay of the death.
Yeah, probably did end up killing the bunny. He might have killed the bunny and saved a lot of innocent bystanders who just got killed by a falling over elephant who wouldn't have died if the bunny hadn't stupidly jumped in underneath the elephant.
Yeah, probably the bunny did that because they were trying to get as far away from the fire as possible. And probably the animals in the outside of the circle were being toasted. And there's also another story involving a king and a sacrifice that the king needed to make. And so instead of sacrificing a real animal, he asked his assistants to construct a rooster stuffed with flour, and he sacrificed, kind of mock sacrificed this not rooster. And still he was condemned with bad karma, and the giants, or the giant texts from where this was excerpted, would say the mere act itself is a harmful act. It's a reproachable act, even though it didn't directly result in harm to any animal. So yeah, the giants are quite extreme if we are talking about the monks, especially. They even go so far as to, as was said, to not consume water straight from a source. So they would ask some layperson assisting the giants to filter the water, or filter themselves, or to boil the water. But the other person boiling the water is the one doing harm. And so they escape from harm by not doing that and having an assistant to boil the water for them. So there's that.
Well, so there was a debate, like if the assistant boiled the water for them, it would be like considered that they would accrue bad karma for that, or negative karma for that. But as long as the assistant boiled the water not for the monks, and then only after like the decision had been made, like this water was purified, then the monks drank the purified water, that would be okay. But like if it was being boiled for the sake of the monks, just by an assistant, that would still cause them bad karma. So
yeah. Karma is a very elusive substance. It's very difficult to quantify, and these guys claim that they are masters at quantifying karma. That's something that baffles me as also.
Also, they're going all in on a belief that they have no way to verify.
Exactly.
No way to verify if they're coming back at all after death. Like there's no evidence of everyone coming back after death as anything. So it's a bit much.
But still, even though they didn't convert the entirety of the Indian subcontinent to ahimsa, like hardcore ahimsa as these monks depicted here practice, probably many people took vegetarian recipes from them, or vegan recipes, and also tried to not harm animals ritualistically, or at least felt ashamed by doing so, as mentioned before, and not conduct any rituals at all. Basically, harm that is completely unnecessary and unbased was averted. So it's kind of like these guys are going over the top by giving an example, and people go like 20%, and it resulted in good. So maybe that could be some good extracted from Jainism.
Yeah. I think some good can be extracted from them, or from it. I'm very skeptical about the idea that people are getting tasty vegan recipes from them. They're ascetics. I think if they're eating vegetarian, but like probably very basic and not flamboyant, elaborate recipes at all. I doubt.
Yes. Yeah, and this is pretty much, in terms of visual aids, what I had. And would you guys want to add anything more, or maybe we could close?
I'm happy to call it a day. How about you, Graham?
I'm good calling it a day.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
So see you.
Yeah.
Thank
you,
go ahead.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Graham. And thank you in their absence to Zara and Wolfy for joining us. And thank you to Mark and Prashant for contributing in the comment sections. Looking forward to the next one. We'll probably do another 3 episodes or so next week, but we'll
schedule.
We'll schedule, yeah.
Yeah. reiterating what you said, thank you to all involved.
That's much briefer than to do it.
See you guys.
All right. Bye-bye.